My wife was barely in the ground when they came for everything. My business, my home, my dignity. They thought a 70-year-old black man was an easy target, a relic to be discarded along with the funeral flowers. My son-in-law laughed in my face and called me obsolete. He told me the world had moved on and that I needed to step aside. He did not know I had a secret weapon buried in a contract from 30 years ago. He wanted my empire. I gave it to him. But when his lawyer read the final clause, the color drained from his face and he realized he had just inherited a nightmare. Before I tell you how I destroyed their greed with one sentence, let me know where you are tuning in from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe respect is earned, not taken. I am Isaiah Bishop, but everyone in Atlanta knows me as Ike. For 40 years I ran Bishop Haulage with a firm handshake and a straight spine, but today my spine felt like it was crumbling. The house smelled of lilies and fried chicken, a combination that will forever remind me of the worst day of my life. It was the repast, the gathering after the funeral of my beloved Ruth. She had been my rock, my business partner, and the only person who truly understood me. Now the house was filled with people, yet I had never felt more alone. I sat in my leather armchair in the corner of the living room, clutching a glass of iced tea that had long since gone watery. I watched the sisters from the church bustling around the dining table, arranging trays of collard greens, cornbread, and baked macaroni and cheese. It was the food Ruth loved. It was the food that comforted our souls. But across the room, I saw him, Brad, my son-in-law. He stood out like a sore thumb in his fitted Italian suit that cost more than my first truck. He was not mourning. He was scrolling through his phone, tapping furiously, looking up only to grimace at the guests. I watched him corner Mrs. Higgins, the head of the church choir, who was kindly offering him a plate. He waved her away with a look of pure disgust, as if she were offering him poison. I tried to look for my daughter Nia. She was standing by the patio door looking pale and fragile. I wanted to go to her to hold her, but my knees were stiff and my heart was heavy. Before I could muster the strength to stand, Brad spotted me. He did not come over to offer a hug or a condolence. He marched toward me with the stride of a man who owned the place. "Can you believe this bill, Isaiah?" Brad hissed, waving a piece of paper in my face. He did not even call me Dad anymore. I looked at him confused. "We just buried my wife. We are grieving, Brad. Not now." "No, we need to talk about this now," he insisted, his voice loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "Do you have any idea how much this soul food catering cost? For this amount, we could have had salmon tartare and a decent Sauvignon Blanc. Instead, we have grease and carbs. It is embarrassing. Look at these people wiping their hands on napkins. It is low class." My grip tightened on my glass. That food was prepared by women who have known Ruth for 50 years. They cooked with love. You show them respect. Brad rolled his eyes, a gesture of disrespect so casual it made my blood boil. Respect does not pay the invoices, Isaiah. And speaking of invoices, I saw the quarterly report for Bishop Haulage on your desk. The margins are slipping, 2% down from last year. I could not believe it. My wife had been dead for 3 days, buried for 3 hours, and he was talking about profit margins. The fuel prices are up, Brad. The whole industry is feeling it. We are fine. The company is solid. Now please lower your voice. Solid is a relative term, he scoffed, pulling a chair close to me, invading my personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and arrogance. I have been talking to some of my contacts in finance. Private equity is hot right now. If we liquidate the fleet, sell the older trucks, and pivot to a brokerage model, we could cash out. I stared at him. Liquidate. Sell. Those trucks were not just machines. I knew every driver by name. I knew their families. I built that fleet one vehicle at a time, starting with a rusted Ford when Ruth and I were 25. I am not selling a single tire, I said, my voice low and dangerous. That company is not for sale. It is my legacy. It is what will take care of Nia when I am gone. Brad laughed, a short, sharp bark of a sound that drew eyes from across the room. Nia does not need a trucking company, Isaiah. She needs liquidity, and frankly, you are not in a position to make these decisions anymore. I set my glass down on the side table with a heavy thud. Excuse me, I am the owner and CEO of Bishop Haulage. I make every decision. Brad shook his head, a pitying smile plastering itself onto his face. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. Face it, Ike. You are 70. You are tired. You just lost your wife. You are emotional. You are not thinking clearly. The world has moved on. It is a digital economy now. You are still using paper logs and handshake deals. It is obsolete. You are obsolete. The word hung in the air between us. Obsolete. He was calling me useless in my own living room. I looked over at Nia again. She was watching us now. She had to hear him. She had to see the way he was leaning over me, bullying me. I waited for her to step in. I waited for her to tell her husband to back off, but she just took a sip of her wine and looked down at her shoes. My heart shattered into a million more pieces. She was letting this happen. Brad took my silence for submission. He stood up, straightening his jacket, looking around the room as if addressing an audience. Nia and I have discussed it. Effective Monday morning, I will be stepping in as interim CEO. We are going to restructure. We need to cut the dead weight. I stood up. It took every ounce of strength I had, but I stood up to look him in the eye. You will do no such thing. You have no authority. You have never driven a truck in your life. You are a failed day trader who lives off my daughter's inheritance. The room went silent. The clinking of forks stopped. The murmurs died down. All eyes were on us. Brad, his face turned red, his jaw clenched. I had struck a nerve. He hated being reminded that his flashy lifestyle was funded by my hard work. He took a step closer to me, his chest puffing out. Watch your mouth, old man. You forget who holds the cards now. Ruth left 49% of the company to Nia, and since you are clearly mentally compromised by grief, I am going to petition the board to declare you unfit. You would not dare, I growled. Oh, I already have, Brad smirked, tapping his phone. The emergency meeting is scheduled for Monday at 9. Enjoy your weekend, Isaiah. It will be your last one as the boss. And do me a favor. Tell these people to wrap it up. I have a real estate appraiser coming in an hour to look at the house. What? I gasped. This is my house. Brad checked his watch, dismissing me entirely. It is a big asset sitting idle. Nia agrees. You do not need 5 bedrooms for one old man. A nice assisted living facility would be safer, less maintenance. We are doing this for you, really. He patted my shoulder, a condescending, patronizing pat that made me want to strike him. But I did not. I froze. The sheer audacity of it paralyzed me. He was not just taking the company, he was taking my home. He was erasing my existence. Brad turned and walked away, heading toward the buffet table to grab a bottle of water, bypassing the sweet tea. He looked victorious. He looked like a man who had just conquered a kingdom without firing a shot. I sank back into my chair. My hands were trembling not from age, but from a rage so pure and hot it felt like lava in my veins. I looked at the photos on the mantle, me and Ruth. The day we bought the first truck, the day we moved into this house, the day Nia was born. Brad wanted to sell it all. He wanted to turn my life into cash to pay off his gambling debts I knew he had, even if Nia pretended they did not exist. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Mrs. Higgins. She handed me a plate of food. Eat, baby, she whispered. You need your strength. The devil is busy today. I looked up at her kind face. She was right. The devil was in my house wearing an Italian suit. He thought I was done. He thought I was a senile old man who would roll over and die just because he said so. He thought Monday morning would be his coronation. I took the plate. I took a forkful of Ruth's favorite greens. I chewed slowly, forcing myself to swallow past the lump in my throat. The flavor brought tears to my eyes, but it also brought something else. Clarity. Brad thought he knew the business. He thought he knew the numbers. But he did not know the history. He did not know about the corporate bylaws I wrote back when a handshake meant something. He did not know about the separation of assets. I wiped my mouth with a napkin. Let him have his weekend victory. Let him toast to his new empire. Monday was coming for me too, and I was not going to the board meeting alone. I needed to make a phone call. I pulled my old flip phone out of my pocket. Brad had laughed at it earlier, calling it a dinosaur. But this dinosaur had the number of the one man Brad should fear more than anyone. My old lawyer, Saul Cohen. I dialed the number. It rang once. Twice. Hello, Saul, I said, my voice steady for the first time all day. Isaiah Saul, his gravelly voice answered. I am so sorry about Ruth. Save it, Saul, I said, watching Brad laugh across the room as he toasted with a glass of my best scotch. I need you to find the 1995 land lease agreement, the one with the clause 4.2. There was a pause on the other end. Then I heard the rustle of papers and a low chuckle. The nuclear option. Are you sure, Isaiah? I looked at my daughter, who was still refusing to meet my eyes. I looked at my son-in-law, who was already treating my home like a liquidation sale. "I have never been more sure in my life," I said. "Meet me at the office on Monday, and Saul, wear your best suit. We are going to a funeral, but this time it is not going to be mine." I woke up the next morning not to the smell of coffee or the sound of birds, but to a strange scratching noise coming from downstairs. It sounded like masking tape being peeled off a roll. Zip, stick, zip, stick. For a moment I forgot. I forgot Ruth was gone. I forgot about the funeral yesterday. I forgot about Brad's threats. I lay there in the half-light staring at the ceiling fan that Ruth and I had installed 20 years ago during a heat wave. Then reality came crashing back down on me like a bag of cement. I threw the covers off and put on my robe. My joints were stiff, screaming at me to go back to sleep, to hide from the world for just one more day. But the noise continued. Zip, stick. I walked out into the hallway. The first thing I saw was a bright neon green sticker on the antique mirror at the top of the stairs. It was a small, round dot like a price tag at a yard sale. I peeled it off the adhesive, leaving a sticky residue on the mahogany frame. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. I went down the stairs one heavy step at a time. The living room looked like a crime scene, but instead of police tape, there were green and orange stickers everywhere. On the lamps, on the television, on the vase Ruth brought back from our trip to Charleston. Standing in the middle of my living room was a stranger. He was a short man with a clipboard, wearing a polo shirt that was 2 sizes too tight. He was humming to himself as he slapped a sticker onto the back of my recliner. "Excuse me," I barked, my voice rough with sleep and anger. "Who are you, and why are you tagging my furniture?" The man jumped, dropping his pen. He looked toward the kitchen. Mr. Larson asked me to inventory the high-value items first." Mr. Larson. That was Brad. I marched into the kitchen. There they were. Brad and Nia sitting at my breakfast table, drinking my coffee out of my mugs. Brad had a laptop open. Nia was staring into her cup, her shoulders hunched. "Good morning, sunshine," Brad said, not looking up from his screen. "I see you met Gary. He is the best appraiser in the city. He is going to give us a fair market value for everything by noon." I gripped the back of a kitchen chair so hard my knuckles turned white. "Get him out. Get him out of my house right now," Brad sighed, closing his laptop with a dramatic snap. He spun around in his chair to face me. "Isaiah, be reasonable. We are just getting ahead of the curve. This house is 4,000 square feet. It is a money pit. The heating bill alone could feed a family of 4. We are doing you a favor." I looked at Nia, my little girl. She was wearing one of her mother's old cardigans, looking like a ghost. "Nia, tell me you did not agree to this. Tell me you are not letting this man sell your mother his things before the grass has even grown on her grave." Nia finally looked up. Her eyes were red and rimmed with dark circles. She looked exhausted, but there was something else in her eyes. Fear, and a rehearsed resolve. "Daddy, please," she said, her voice trembling. "Brad is right. You cannot manage this place alone. It is too much. Mom would want you to be comfortable. She would not want you stressing about gutter cleaning and property taxes." "Ruth would want me to live in the home we built," I said, my voice rising. "We paid off this mortgage 15 years ago. There is no stress, Nia. The only stress I have is standing right next to you." Brad stood up then, walking over to the counter to pour himself more coffee. He moved with an arrogance that made my skin crawl. "Look, Ike, I ran the numbers. If we sell the house now, while the market is hot, and liquidate the contents, we are looking at a net cash injection of nearly $800,000. He pulled a glossy brochure out of his bag and slid it across the table toward me. I picked it up. Golden Horizon Senior Living Community. On the cover, an old white couple was smiling while playing chess. "It is a luxury facility," Brad said, sounding like a late-night infomercial. "Heated pool, 24-hour medical staff, meals prepared by chefs, not cafeteria ladies. And the best part, it only costs $6,000 a month." "And the rest of the money?" I asked, dropping the brochure into the trash can without opening it. "What happens to the other $700,000? Brad smiled, a shark-smelling blood. "That is the beauty of it. I have an opportunity. A cryptocurrency exchange platform that is about to go public. If we get in on the ground floor next week, that money could triple in 6 months. We are talking about generational wealth, Isaiah. We could secure Nia's future." I laughed. A dry, bitter sound. "Crypto. You want to sell my home, the home where your wife took her first steps to buy magic internet money? It is the future of finance, Brad shouted, losing his cool for a second. You would not understand. You are still moving boxes from point A to point B. I'm talking about decentralized assets. I walked over to the hallway door. I could hear Gary, the appraiser, in the music room. The music room was sacred. I walked in just in time to see him leaning over Ruth's baby grand piano. He had a green sticker in his hand. He was about to slap it right onto the polished ebony wood right above the keys where Ruth's fingers had danced 1,000 times. "Do not touch that," I roared. Gary froze. I walked over, grabbed him by the collar of his cheap polo shirt, and shoved him toward the front door. "Get out, take your stickers, and get out of my house." Hey, Brad came running into the room, Nia trailing behind him. "You cannot treat people like that." I opened the front door and pushed Gary out onto the porch. He scrambled down the steps, dropping his clipboard. I slammed the door and locked it. Then I turned to face my family. "You are insane," Brad hissed. "That man was going to make us rich." "I am not selling," I said, my voice deadly calm. "I am not moving to a nursing home. And you are never, ever getting a dime of my money to gamble on your digital coins." Nia burst into tears. It was a loud, wailing sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "Daddy, why are you being so selfish?" The word hit me like a physical blow. Selfish. I had worked double shifts for 20 years so she could go to private school. I had stayed up nights fixing trucks so she could have debt-free college. "Selfish," I whispered. "Yes," she screamed, her face blotchy and distorted. "You do not need all this. You are one person. Brad and I are drowning in debt. We need a fresh start. Mom wanted us to be taken care of. Why are you hoarding everything?" Brad put his arm around her, playing the role of the protective husband. "See what you are doing. You are upsetting her. You are so obsessed with your pride, you cannot see that your daughter is suffering." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was wrinkled and coffee-stained. "Fine," Brad said, his voice dropping to a cold, hard tone. "We tried to do this the nice way. We tried to make it a family decision. But you want to play the dictator." He unfolded the paper and held it up. It was a printout of a legal document. "I recognize this," Brad said. "It is the shareholder agreement for Bishop College. You own 51%. Ruth owned 49%. I stared at him. "And Ruth left her shares to Nia. I know that." "Exactly." Brad smiled, but it was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just found a weakness in the fence. "Nia owns 49%. And as her husband, I advise her on her assets." So what I said, "I am still the majority shareholder. I am the CEO. For now," Brad said. "But there is a clause in here. Clause 12. In the event that the majority shareholder is deemed mentally incapacitated or acts in a way that is detrimental to the financial health of the company, the minority shareholders can call for an emergency vote of no confidence to remove him." He took a step closer. "You just physically assaulted an appraiser. You are refusing to monetize assets to cover debts. You are emotional, unstable." "You are bluffing," I said, though my stomach turned over. "Am I?" Brad challenged. "I have already called the other 2 board members, your old friends Bill and Jerry. I told them about your outburst at the funeral. I told them you are confusing invoices. I told them you are losing it." He leaned in his face inches from mine. "They are worried, Ike. They are very worried about their dividends. And tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., we are going to have a vote. Nia will vote against you. Bill and Jerry just need a little push to join her. And once you are out as CEO, we will sell the company, liquidate the assets, and you will not be able to stop us." I looked at Nia. She was not crying anymore. She was looking at the floor, refusing to meet my gaze. She knew. She knew he was lying about my mental state, and she was going to let him do it anyway. I reached out and snatched the paper from Brad's hand. I crumpled it into a ball. "Get out," I said. Brad laughed. "We are leaving. We have a board meeting to prepare for. Come on, Nia." He took her arm and led her toward the door. As they stepped out onto the porch, Brad turned back one last time. "Look around, Isaiah. Enjoy the view. Because by this time next week, the only thing you will be looking at is the wall of a state nursing home." He slammed the door. I stood in the silence of my hallway. The neon green stickers were still there, mocking me. They had invaded my sanctuary. They had turned my daughter against me, and now they were coming for the one thing I had left. My life is work. I walked over to the window and watched them get into Brad's flashy sports car. He was gesturing wildly, probably planning how to spend the money he did not have yet. Nia was staring out the window looking like a prisoner in her own life. I looked down at the crumpled ball of paper in my hand. He thought Clause 12 was his golden ticket. He thought he could use the law to destroy me. I smoothed the paper out on the side table. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from adrenaline. "You want a board meeting, Brad?" I whispered to the empty room. "I will give you a board meeting." I went to the kitchen and picked up the phone again. I dialed Saul Cohen his number. "Saul," I said when he answered, "change of plans, bring the full binder. And Saul, bring the file on the land trust. The one we set up before Nia was even born." I hung up the phone. I peeled a green sticker off the wall and stuck it onto the crumpled paper. They wanted a war. They had no idea they had just declared it on a man who had been fighting battles since before they were born. Monday mornings at Bishop Hallage always smelled the same. It was a mix of diesel fuel wet pavement and the strong dark roast coffee that my dispatcher Old Man Miller brewed in the break room. For 40 years that smell was my perfume. It was the scent of progress. It was the scent of the American dream that I had clawed out of the dirt with my bare hands. I pulled my truck up to the main gate at 6:30 sharp, just like I had every single day since 1982. The sun was just starting to peek over the Atlanta skyline, painting the chrome bumpers of my fleet in shades of gold and orange. I felt a swell of pride in my chest. Whatever Brad said, whatever Nia thought, this was mine. I built this, and I was going to fight for it. I rolled down the window and reached out to tap my security badge against the reader. Beep. A harsh, low tone. The little light on the box flashed red. Access denied. I frowned, rubbing the card against my sleeve. Maybe it was dusty. I tapped it again. Beep. Red light. A cold knot formed in my stomach. This system never malfunctioned. I had installed it myself. I looked through the chain link fence toward the guard booth. Usually Sam would be sitting there reading the sports section, waiting to wave me in. Sam had been with me for 10 years. He was a good man, a grandfather who needed the insurance for his wife's dialysis. But Sam was not in the booth. Instead, a stranger stepped out. He was a mountain of a man, white with a buzz cut, and a tactical vest that looked like he was ready for a war zone, not a trucking yard. On his chest was a badge for a private security firm I had never hired. Titan Security. I opened my car door and stepped out. "Excuse me, son," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "The reader seems to be down. Can you open the gate? I am Isaiah Bishop. I own this place." The man did not smile. He did not walk over to the gate. He just stood there, arms crossed over his chest, staring at me through mirrored sunglasses. "Mr. Bishop," he said, his voice flat and robotic, "I have been instructed not to allow you access to the premises." I laughed. It was a nervous, confused laugh. "Instructed? Instructed by whom? This is my company. My name is on the sign right above your head." The guard did not look up at the sign. He reached for the radio on his shoulder. "Target is at the gate," he mumbled. "Target. I was a target at my own company." Suddenly, the glass doors of the main office building swung open. I expected to see my shift supervisors. I expected to see my drivers. Instead, I saw Brad. He was walking with a strut I had never seen before. He was flanked by 2 more of these tactical security guards. He stopped about 10 feet from the gate safe on the other side of the fence. He looked at me like I was a beggar asking for change. "Good morning, Isaiah," Brad said. He sounded bored. "Open this gate, Brad," I said, my hands gripping the cold steel of the fence. "Open it now before I call the police." "Go ahead." Brad shrugged. "Call them. They will just enforce the court order I am holding right here." He held up a document pressed against the chain link so I could see it. It was thick, stamped with the seal of the Fulton County Superior Court. I squinted to read the bold text at the top. Temporary restraining order and emergency injunction. Based on credible evidence of declining mental capacity and financial mismanagement, Brad read aloud, savoring every syllable. "The board has voted to suspend Isaiah Bishop from all executive duties effectively immediately. You are barred from the property to prevent further destruction of company assets." "Destruction of assets," I choked out. "I built these assets. I polished every one of these trucks. You assaulted an appraiser yesterday." "Isaiah," Brad said, shaking his head with fake sadness. "You are erratic." Nia signed the affidavit. "She is worried about you." We all are. We cannot let you drive the company into the ground just because you are having episodes. I looked past him. I saw faces pressed against the office windows. My employees, my people, they were watching. They looked terrified. I saw Sam, the old guard, standing by the dumpster looking at his feet. He had been pushed aside just like me. Brad noticed me looking. Don not bother waving Ike. We are restructuring. The old staff is being phased out. Titan Security is handling operations now. We need a more professional look. I looked at the white guards surrounding him. I looked at my mostly black workforce peeking out of the windows. A professional look. I knew exactly what that meant. He was scrubbing the soul out of my company. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake the gate until it rattled off its hinges. I wanted to climb over and wipe that smug grin off his face. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The rage was a physical thing, hot and blinding. But then I saw the phone in Brad's hand. He was recording. He wanted a show. He wanted the angry, senile old man. He wanted footage he could show a judge to prove I was dangerous. He wanted me to lose control so he could lock me away in that facility with the heated pool and the locked doors. I took a deep breath. The smell of diesel filled my lungs one last time. I released the fence. I straightened my jacket. I adjusted my hat. "You are making a mistake, Brad," I said. My voice was quiet. It was the calm before the tornado. "The only mistake was waiting this long to take the keys," Brad replied, turning his back on me. "Escort him off the property. If he comes back, arrest him for trespassing." He walked away. He walked into my building, sat in my chair, and drank my coffee. The guard took a step toward the fence, his hand resting on the taser at his belt. "You heard the man, Mr. Bishop. Time to go." I looked at the guard. I looked at the gate. I looked at the empire I had lost in the span of 5 minutes. I turned around and walked back to my car. My legs felt heavy, like I was walking through wet concrete. But my mind was razor sharp. They took my badge. They took my keys. They took my title. But they forgot one thing. They forgot that a company is not just trucks and buildings. It is paperwork. It is contracts. It is the fine print that nobody reads because they are too busy looking at the bottom line. I got into my car and started the engine. I did not drive home. I did not drive to the cemetery to cry to Ruth. I drove to the worst part of town. I drove past the strip malls and the payday loan shacks down to a little brick building next to a laundromat. The sign above the door was faded, missing the letter L in lawyer. Saul Cohen didn't have a high-rise office. He didn't have tactical security guards. He wore suits that were out of style in 1990, and he smoked cigars that smelled like burning tires. But Saul Cohen had a brain like a steel trap, and a heart as black as mine was feeling right now. He was the one who helped me incorporate back when banks would not lend to a black man in the South. He knew where every skeleton was buried because he had helped me dig the holes. I parked the car and walked to the door. I could see Saul through the window, hunched over a pile of files, looking like a vulture waiting for a carcass. Brad thought he had won because he had a court order. He did not know I was about to unleash a legal hurricane that would blow his little house of cards straight to hell. I pushed the door open. A little bell jingled. Saul looked up. He did not smile. He just took the cigar out of his mouth and pointed to the empty chair. "I was wondering when you would show up, Ike," he croaked. "I heard about the new security guards. Very fancy." I sat down. I looked him in the eye. "I want to kill him, Saul." Saul nodded slowly. "We can do that. But prison is uncomfortable for men our age. I have a better idea." He reached under his desk and pulled out a dusty leather-bound binder. "Do you remember the land trust, Ike? The one we set up to protect the property from creditors back in '95? I nodded, vaguely. Saul blew a smoke ring into the air. Brad is looking at the corporate assets, the trucks, the accounts, the client list. But he forgot to check who owns the dirt underneath his feet. He opened the binder. The pages were yellowed with age. "Let him play CEO for a few days," Saul grinned, revealing yellow teeth. "Let him sign the papers. Let him think he is the king of the world. Because once he signs that transfer of ownership," Saul tapped a paragraph on page 42. "This clause triggers. And when it does, your son-in-law is going to wish he had never met your daughter." I looked at the clause. I read the words. And for the first time since Ruth died, I smiled. "It is time to go to work, Saul," I said. Saul picked up his pen. "It is going to be a pleasure, Ike. A real pleasure." The humiliation started at the grocery store. It was a mundane Tuesday, or as mundane as a day can be when your entire life is being dismantled by the people who are supposed to love you. I stood in the checkout line at Kroger with a loaf of bread, a carton of eggs, and a small bag of coffee beans. The total was $24.15. I swiped my debit card. The machine beeped. A harsh, low sound that made the cashier frown. "Declined," she said loud enough for the woman behind me to hear. I felt a flush of heat creep up my neck. "That is impossible," I said, forcing a smile. "I have been banking with that institution for 40 years. Try it again, please." She sighed a heavy, impatient sound and swiped it again. Beep. Declined. Contact your financial institution. I looked at the line of people behind me. I saw pity in their eyes. They saw an old black man in a worn jacket who could not afford eggs. They did not see a CEO. They did not see a man who had put 3 kids through college on scholarships he funded. They just saw poverty. I pulled a crumpled $20 bill and a handful of quarters from my pocket, paid for the items, and walked out with my head down. When I got to my car, I called the bank. The automated voice told me my accounts had been frozen due to suspicious activity reported by the power of attorney. Brad. He had moved faster than I anticipated. He had cut off my blood supply, but the real blow came when I got home. My phone, which had been strangely silent all morning, suddenly started buzzing. It was a text from Jerry, my oldest friend and a board member at Bishop Hallage. "I am so sorry," Ike, the text read. "We did not know it had gotten this bad. We are praying for you." I frowned. What had gotten bad? I called Jerry immediately. He answered on the first ring, his voice hushed. "Ike, you shouldn't be calling me," he whispered. "Brad said you might get agitated." "Agitated? Jerry, what are you talking about?" "Why are my accounts frozen?" Jerry paused. "You mean you haven't seen the email?" "The company-wide memo." My stomach dropped. "Send it to me, Jerry. Now." A minute later, my phone pinged. It was an email sent from the CEO's office. The subject line read "Leadership Transition and Health Update regarding Isaiah Bishop." I read the words, and I felt like I was being stabbed in the chest. "It is with heavy hearts that we announce the immediate stepping down of our founder, Isaiah Bishop, due to a rapid and unfortunate decline in his cognitive health. Mr. Bishop has been diagnosed with advanced dementia leading to erratic behavior and financial vulnerability. We ask that you respect the family's privacy as we transition him into full-time care." Dementia. He had branded me. He had taken my legacy, my sharp mind, my 40 years of wisdom, and reduced it to a medical condition I did not even have. He stripped me of my authority not by fighting me, but by invalidating my reality. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the screen until my vision blurred. I was not angry anymore. I was terrified. Because if everyone believes you are crazy, the truth sounds like the ravings of a madman. Then the doorbell rang. It was Nia, my sweet Nia. But she did not look sweet today. She looked like a weary nurse visiting a difficult patient. She was carrying a plastic bag and that same stack of brochures. "Dad," she said softly, letting herself in. "I brought you some groceries. I know your card isn't working." She set the bag on the counter. It was filled with soft foods. Applesauce, pudding, oatmeal, food for a toothless old man, food for an invalid. "Nia," I said, standing up, "I do not have dementia. Brad is lying to you. He is lying to everyone." Nia sighed, leaning against the counter. She looked so tired. "Dad, please. Don't make this harder than it has to be. We have the proof." "Proof?" I asked. "What proof?" She reached into her purse and pulled out a bank statement. She slid it across the table. "Last week," she said, her voice trembling, "you wired $50,000 to an account in Lagos, Nigeria. The bank flagged it as a romance scam. Brad managed to stop it just in time." I stared at the paper. There it was. My name. My account number. A transfer request for $50,000, dated last Tuesday at 2 p.m. "I did not do this," I whispered. "Nia, look at me. I was at the funeral home last Tuesday at 2 p.m. I was picking out your mother's casket." Nia shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "No, Dad. The funeral home appointment was at 10. By 2, you were here alone. Brad said he found you on the computer talking to someone online. He didn't want to embarrass you, so he didn't say anything until he saw the transfer." I looked at the date. I looked at the time. A fog of doubt began to creep into my mind. Was I home at 2? I remembered the morning clearly. The casket, the velvet lining, but the afternoon I remembered sitting in this chair. I remembered feeling numb. Did I turn on the computer? Did I click on something? Grief is a heavy blanket. It muffles time. It distorts memory. For a split second, the most terrifying second of my life, I questioned my own sanity. Maybe Brad was right. Maybe I was losing it. Maybe the stress of losing Ruth had broken my brain. Nia saw the hesitation in my eyes. She seized on it. "See?" she said, gently placing a hand on my arm. "It is okay to forget, Dad. It is part of the disease. That is why we need to get you to Golden Horizon. They can help you. You will be safe there. You won't have to worry about money or scammers or businesses anymore. Brad is just trying to protect you." She left the brochures on the table. "Think about it, Dad. We are moving your things on Friday. It is for the best." She kissed my forehead like I was a child and left. I sat in the silence of the house that suddenly felt like a prison. The doubt was a poison spreading through my veins. I looked at the bank statement again. It looked so real. The numbers were precise. I needed air. I needed to breathe. I walked out to the garage. My old Ford pickup truck sat there gathering dust. I hadn't driven it in a week. I opened the door and sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel. This was the only place I felt like myself. I looked at the dashboard. Mounted on the windshield was my dash cam. I had installed it years ago, a habit from my trucking days. Trust everyone but cut the cards. Record everything. I looked at the little device. It had a motion sensor mode. It recorded whenever someone walked in front of the truck or opened the garage door. My heart skipped a beat. If I was home last Tuesday afternoon, the truck would have been here. I pulled the SD card out of the camera. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I ran back into the house, into my study. I booted up my desktop computer, the same computer I allegedly used to wire the money. I inserted the card. I opened the folder for last Tuesday. There were dozens of clips. Me leaving at 9:30 for the funeral home. Me coming back at noon. Then silence. Until 1:45 p.m. The camera positioned in the garage faced the side door of the house, the door that led directly into the mudroom and then the study. At 1:45, a car pulled into the driveway. It was not my car. It was a silver Porsche, Brad's car. I watched, holding my breath. Brad got out of the car. He was not at work. He was supposed to be at a conference in downtown Atlanta. He looked around, checking the street. Then he walked to the side door. He used a key. He let himself in. The clip ended. The next clip started at 2:30 p.m. Brad walked out. He was holding my laptop bag. He put it in his trunk. Then he went back inside. 5 minutes later, he came out again without the bag and drove away. I froze the frame on his face. He was smiling. He had come here while I was napping upstairs, medicated with grief. He had used my computer. He had made the transfer himself or spoofed it. He had manufactured the evidence of my insanity. The fog in my brain vanished instantly. The doubt evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity that was sharper than any knife. I was not crazy. I was not senile. I was being framed. I looked at the bank statement Nia had left on the table. It was a forgery or a manipulation orchestrated by a man who knew my passwords because I trusted him. I leaned back in my chair. The fear was gone. The sadness was gone. Brad had made a fatal error. He thought he was playing against a confused old man. He thought he could gaslight me into signing away my life. But the camera does not lie, and neither does the timestamp. I picked up the phone. I did not call Nia. I did not call the bank. I called Saul Cohen. "I have the smoking gun, Saul," I said. "Good," Saul rasped. "Because I just found something else in the corporate bylaws. Clause 4.2 is just the beginning, Ike. If we can prove fraud, we don't just take the company back. We send him to prison." I looked at the freeze frame of Brad's smiling face on my monitor. "He wants to put me in a home," I whispered to the screen. "I am going to put him in a cell." I ejected the SD card and put it in my safe. Then I went to the kitchen and threw the nursing home brochures into the trash compactor. I listened to the machine crush them into nothing. It was time to stop being the victim. It was time to be the CEO again. For 3 days I became a ghost in my own home. I did not answer the door. I did not answer the phone. I let the voicemail fill up with messages from Nia oscillating between fake worry and real annoyance. "Dad, please pick up. We are worried. Dad, the movers are coming on Friday. Be ready." Dad stopped being childish. To them, my silence was the sound of defeat. They imagined me curled up in bed, staring at the wall, waiting for the inevitable end. They thought I was broken, a senile old man accepting his fate. They were celebrating my surrender. I could almost hear the champagne corks popping in Brad's luxury condo uptown. But they were wrong. My silence was not surrender. It was the deep, heavy silence of a hunter waiting in the brush. The curtains were drawn, but the lights in my study burned bright 24 hours a day. I was not sleeping. I was working, and I was not alone. Saul Cohen sat across from me at my mahogany desk. He looked like a rumpled heap of laundry, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up, and a half-eaten box of pizza sitting on top of a stack of legal pads. The room smelled of pepperoni old paper and the cheap cigars Saul chewed on but never lit inside the house out of respect for Ruth. We were drowning in paper. While Brad was out there talking about digital assets and cryptocurrency and cloud storage, Saul and I went back to the bedrock. We went back to the physical archives. We pulled boxes from the attic that had not been opened since the Clinton administration. You know, Ike, Saul grumbled, rubbing his bloodshot eyes. Most people would just take the buyout and go play golf. Why are we doing this? I looked at a photo of Ruth on the wall, because they did not just want the money, Saul. They wanted to erase us. They wanted to strip the paint off the trucks and put a new logo on the door. They wanted to pretend Bishop Hollidge started the day Brad walked in. I cannot let that happen. Saul nodded. He understood. He dug back into the file labeled Corporate Formation 1995. This was the year we expanded. The year we bought the big lot on Industrial Boulevard. The year we went from a mom-and-pop outfit to a regional player. I remembered sitting in this very room terrified of the debt I was taking on. Saul had been there then too. He had told me I needed to protect myself. He had told me to structure the company in a specific way to shield my personal assets from lawsuits. I had listened to him then. But over the decades as business boomed and life got comfortable, I had forgotten the details. I had just signed where Saul told me to sign. Now we were looking for a needle in a haystack of legalese. Wait a minute, Saul said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the hum of the air conditioner like a knife. He pulled a document out of a blue folder. The paper was yellowed at the edges. He adjusted his thick glasses and squinted. Ike, do you remember the restructuring we did after that driver of yours, Big Mike, jackknifed on the interstate in '94? I nodded. Sure. We were scared we were going to lose everything in the lawsuit. Right, Saul said, a slow grin spreading across his face. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf who just found an unguarded sheep. We separated the assets. We created two distinct legal entities. Bishop Hollidge Incorporated, which owns the trucks, the permits, and employs the drivers, and Bishop Land Trust, which owns the real estate, the yard, the maintenance bays, the office building. I leaned forward. I remember that. But I own both. So what is the difference? Saul tapped the paper with a stained finger. You own both, yes, but they are separate circles on the Venn diagram. Bishop Hollidge Incorporated pays rent to Bishop Land Trust. It is a standard setup to siphon profits out of the operating company and avoid double taxation. He looked up at me, his eyes twinkling with malicious glee. But here is the kicker. Brad is petitioning the court to take control of Bishop Hollidge Incorporated. He wants the operating company. He wants the brand. He wants the cash flow. But the land, the dirt under the tires, that is in the trust. And the trust is not part of the corporate acquisition. I sat back, my mind racing. So if he takes the company, he takes the truck Saul finished, but he does not take the parking lot. That is good, I said, rubbing my chin. But he can just keep paying rent, right? The lease probably transfers over. Saul flipped a few pages. He ran his finger down a column of dates. He stopped at the bottom of page 6. He started to laugh. It was a dry, rasping sound that turned into a cough. Oh, Isaiah, God loves you. He really does. What I asked. What is it? Saul turned the document around so I could see it. Look at the expiration date of the master lease agreement. I looked. 30 years. Commencing June 1st, 1995. Ending May 31st, 2025. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Today was June 15th. The lease expired 2 weeks ago, I whispered. Exactly, Saul said, slamming his hand on the desk. It expired. And because you were the owner of both sides, nobody noticed. Nobody sent a renewal notice because you would have just been mailing a letter to yourself. So, what does that mean, I asked, feeling a surge of adrenaline. It means Saul said, leaning in close, that as of right now, Bishop Hollage Incorporated is occupying the premises on a month-to-month basis. There is no contract, no protection, and as the sole trustee of the land trust, I can kick them out. I finished the realization hitting me like a bolt of lightning. You can do more than that, Saul said. You can evict them. You can raise the rent to $1 million a month. You can turn the power off. Without a lease, they are just squatters with 18-wheelers. I stood up and walked to the window. I pulled back the curtain just an inch. Outside, the street was quiet, but in my mind, I could see the chaos. Brad wants the company, I said softly. He thinks he is buying a golden goose. Saul chuckled. He is buying a goose, all right, but he does not know the goose is homeless. I turned back to Saul. But wait. If we tell him this now, he will just force me to sign a lease extension before he closes the deal. He has the power of attorney. He has the court order. Saul shook his head. No. The court order gives him control over the operating company because that is where the alleged mismanagement is. It gives him control over your personal finances because of the alleged dementia, but the land trust, that is a separate entity with a separate successor trustee. And guess who the successor trustee is if you are deemed incapacitated? I held my breath. Who? Me. Saul grinned. And I have not been declared senile by anybody. I am just a grumpy old lawyer who forgot to renew a lease. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a weight I had been carrying since the funeral. So the plan is... I started. The plan is silence, Saul said, closing the binder with a satisfying thud. We let him think he has won. We let him force you out. We let him sign the papers to take full ownership of Bishop Hollage. We let him put his name on the loans and the liabilities. We wait until the ink is dry. We wait until he pops the champagne. And then I said, a cold smile forming on my face. And then Saul said, I send him an eviction notice. 48 hours to vacate the premises. I looked at the phone on my desk. It started buzzing again. It was Nia. Let it ring, Saul said. I watched the screen light up. I watched my daughter's name flash. She was part of this too. She had chosen her side. She had chosen the man who wanted to sell her mother's piano over the father who had built her world. I am not just going to evict them, Saul, I said. I am going to crush them. I sat back down. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. The 3 days of silence had been a crucible burning away the soft parts of my heart. What was left was hard, cold, and ready for war. Brad wanted to play business tycoon. He wanted to use big words like liquidation and synergy. Well, I was about to teach him a new word, leverage, and I had all of it. Get the paperwork ready, Saul, I said. If they want me to sign over the company, I will sign. I will give them exactly what they asked for. Saul pulled a fresh cigar from his pocket and stuck it in his mouth unlit. You are a scary man, Isaiah Bishop. I am just a businessman, I said, and I am about to close the deal of a lifetime. The phone stopped ringing. The house went quiet again, but this time the silence was not empty. It was loaded. It was waiting. Tomorrow I would emerge from my house. I would play the part of the beaten old man. I would shuffle my feet. I would let my hand tremble. I would let Brad gloat. Because I knew something he didn't. He was fighting for the crown. But I owned the castle. The hardest part of a lie is not the words you speak, but the silence you keep while the other person judges you. For 40 years, I built a reputation as a man of iron. I stared down union reps, I negotiated with bankers who wanted to foreclose, and I never blinked. But today, I had to do something much harder. I had to break. I had to become the very thing Brad accused me of being, a confused, broken old man. I spent an hour preparing the stage. I did not shave. I put on my oldest flannel pajamas, the ones with the coffee stain on the pocket that Ruth had tried to bleach out a dozen times. I spilled a little water on the front of them to look like I had lost my dexterity. I lined up pill bottles on the kitchen table. Vitamin C, fish oil, magnesium. But I peeled the labels off so they looked like prescription heavy hitters. I wanted the room to smell like sickness. I wanted it to smell like surrender. When I heard Brad's Porsche pull into the driveway, my heart did not race. It beat slow and steady like a war drum. I sat down in my recliner and slumped my shoulders. I let my mouth hang open just a fraction of an inch. I practiced a tremor in my right hand. The door opened without a knock. They did not knock anymore. It was their house now, in their minds. Dad Nia called out. Her voice was thin. She sounded anxious. I stayed silent, staring at the blank television screen. Brad walked in first. He was wearing a tennis outfit. White polo, white shorts. He looked like he had just come from the country club. He looked at me with a mixture of disgust and triumph. Jesus, it smells like a hospital in here, Brad muttered, waving a hand in front of his nose. Look at him, Nia. He is deteriorating fast. We should have called the paramedics yesterday. Nia walked over to me. She knelt beside the chair. She did not touch me. She hovered her hand over my arm like she was afraid I was contagious. Dad, she whispered, are you okay? You have not answered your phone in 3 days. I turned my head slowly. I made my eyes lose focus. I looked at her ear, not her eyes. Ruth! I croaked. Is dinner ready? Nia recoiled. She stood up, covering her mouth with her hand. Oh my God, Brad. He thinks I am Mom. Brad let out a sigh that was pure theatrics. See, I told you. The cognitive decline is rapid. It is the stress. He cannot handle the pressure of the lawsuit. He cannot handle the reality of the business. He walked over and stood in front of me, blocking the light from the window. Isaiah, he said loudly, like he was talking to someone who was deaf. Isaiah, can you hear me? It is Brad. I blinked. I focused on him. Then I let my face crumble. I let the tears come. It was not hard. I just had to think about how much I missed my wife and how much I hated the man standing in front of me. Brad. I stammered, my voice trembling. The noise. The lawyers. I cannot take it. Please, make it stop. Brad exchanged a look with Nia. A look that said, I told you so. We can make it stop. Isaiah? Brad said, his voice dropping to that patronizing tone he used with waiters and valets. We can make it all go away. You just have to let us help you. I reached out and grabbed his wrist. My grip was weak intentionality, so. I am tired, Brad. I am so tired. I do not want to go to court. I do not want the guards at the gate. I just want to sleep. Then sign the papers. Brad said, pulling a folded document from his tennis bag. He had brought it with him. He was that confident. Sign the transfer. Let me take the burden of the company off your shoulders. I let go of his wrist. I looked at the floor. If I give you the company, I whispered. If I give you the trucks, will you let me stay here? Brad frowned. Here. In the house. Yes, I said. I do not want to go to the home. I want to die in this house, Brad. I want to be with Ruth's things. You take the business. You take the accounts. You take the headaches. Just leave me the house and my old pickup truck. I saw the gears turning in Brad's head. He was doing the math. The house was worth maybe $800,000. The company, Bishop Haulage, with its fleet and its contracts, was worth 10 times that on the open market. He was thinking about the quick sale. He was thinking about the private equity buyers who were lined up. If he let me keep the house, he could get the company for free without a lengthy court battle, without a competency hearing that could drag on for months. He looked at Nia. She was crying silently. He can keep the house, Brad, she pleaded. It is all he has left. If he gives us the business, we do not need the house money. Brad pretended to think about it. He rubbed his chin, looking pained as if he were making a great sacrifice. I do not know, he said. The maintenance here is expensive, but if it means peace for the family, if it means we can move forward. He looked back at me. Okay, Isaiah, we have a deal. You transfer 100% of your shares in Bishop Haulage Incorporated to us. You resign as CEO. In exchange, we drop the competency hearing and you retain a life estate in the residential property. I nodded slowly. Bishop Haulage Incorporated. I repeated, making sure the words were precise. You take the company. Everything associated with the business. Brad said, his eyes gleaming with greed. The assets, the liabilities, the operations. It becomes mine. And you get to sit here and watch TV. I slumped back in the chair. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you for saving me. Brad barely heard me. He was already pulling out his phone. I am calling my lawyer, he said, walking toward the kitchen. We need to draft the final agreement. I want this done now before he has another episode. He was fast. Greed is a powerful accelerant. Within minutes, I heard him barking orders into the phone. Yes, the full transfer. No, forget the competency evaluation. He is surrendering. We are doing a voluntary buyout. I want the papers ready tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. We are signing at his house. Bring a notary." He walked back into the living room. He looked at me with a smirk that made my blood boil. "It is done," he said. "Tomorrow morning, Isaiah. We end this. You will be free. Free." He used that word like he was granting me a pardon. He did not know he was walking into a cage. Nia kissed my cheek. Her lips were cold. "I am sorry, Dad," she whispered, "but this is better. You will see. You do not have to worry about the business anymore." They left 10 minutes later. Brad was practically skipping to the car. He had won. He had defeated the patriarch. He had secured the bag. I watched them drive away through the gap in the curtains. I watched the Porsche disappear down the street. I stood up. I walked to the kitchen sink and washed the coffee stain off my hands. I poured the fake pills back into their original bottles. I straightened my back. The tremor in my hand vanished. I picked up the phone and dialed Saul. "They took the bait, Saul." I heard Saul chuckle on the other end. "Did he ask about the land lease?" Not a word I said. He was too busy counting the trucks. "Good," Saul said. "I will have the eviction notice ready. We will serve him the second the ink is dry on the transfer." I walked back to the living room and looked at the spot where Brad had stood. He thought he had stripped me of my power. He thought he had taken my legacy. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. I would sign my name. I would hand him the keys to the kingdom, and at 9:05 I would burn the kingdom to the ground with him inside it. I went upstairs to my closet. I pushed aside the flannel pajamas. I reached into the back and pulled out my suit, my best suit, the charcoal gray one I wore to church, the one I wore when I closed the deal with Ford. I brushed the lint off the lapel. I was not going to dress like an invalid tomorrow. I was going to dress like the CEO of the Bishop Land Trust, and I was going to enjoy every single second of it. The conference room in Brad's lawyer's office was cold. It was kept at a temperature that suggested human comfort was secondary to the preservation of the expensive art on the walls. It was on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in Buckhead overlooking the city I had helped build one truckload at a time. But from up here you could not see the sweat. You could not see the potholes. You could only see the gleaming facades of money. I sat at the end of a long mahogany table that looked like a runway. I was wearing my church suit, but I had left the top button of my shirt undone and loosened my tie. I slouched in the ergonomic leather chair, keeping my hands folded in my lap to hide their steadiness. To them, I was a defeated king coming to surrender his crown. To me, I was a Trojan horse. Brad sat at the head of the table. He had invited his entire legal team, 3 men in sharp blue suits who looked like they were carved out of ice. Nia sat to his right. She looked small. She was staring at a bottle of sparkling water as if the bubbles held the answers to the questions her conscience was asking. "We are glad you are being reasonable," Isaiah Brad said. He did not look at me. He was flipping through a stack of documents that was 3 inches thick. "This is a standard asset purchase agreement. It transfers all equity voting rights and operational control of Bishop Hallage Incorporated to the new holding company Nia and I have formed." He slid the stack down the table toward me. It made a heavy, ominous sound against the wood. I reached out and touched the paper. It felt like cold skin. "Is that all?" I asked, keeping my voice low and raspy. "Just the company." Brad stopped flipping pages. He exchanged a look with his lead lawyer, a man named Mr. Sterling, who had a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Well, actually," Brad said, leaning back and tenting his fingers, "there are a few addendums. Since we are doing this the easy way, we need to make sure the transition is clean." He signaled Sterling, who slid another document toward me. "What is this?" I asked, squinting at the fine print. "A non-compete agreement," Sterling said smoothly. "It states that for a period of 10 years you cannot start, manage, consult for, or invest in any logistics or transportation business within a 500-mile radius of Atlanta. Furthermore, you cannot contact any current clients or employees of Bishop Hallage." I almost laughed. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop myself. A non-compete. I was 70 years old. Did they think I was going to go out and buy a new fleet and start over numb? This was not about business protection. This was about humiliation. They wanted to make sure that even if I wanted to give advice to a young driver, I would be breaking the law. They wanted to silence me. I looked at Brad. 10 years, I whispered. I will be 80. "You think I'm a threat to you, Brad?" Brad smirked. We just want to make sure you do not get confused, Isaiah. Sometimes in your condition, you might forget you are retired. You might call an old client and say something inappropriate. We are protecting the brand. Protecting the brand. The brand was my name. Bishop. I nodded slowly, acting defeated. Okay. I understand. I will sign it. Good, Brad said. Now there is one more thing. He pulled out a third document. This one was thinner, but I knew it was heavier. The Ruth Bishop Family Trust, Brad said. My head snapped up. That has nothing to do with the company. That is the money Ruth left for the grandchildren, for their education. Brad sighed, looking at Naya with fake sympathy. We know Isaiah. But here is the thing. The trust is heavily invested in low-yield municipal bonds. It is stagnant money. Dead capital. As the current trustee, you have been too conservative. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with that dangerous hunger. We want you to resign as trustee. Naya will take over. We can reallocate those funds into high-growth vehicles, the crypto market, tech startups. We can turn that $2 million into $10 million by the time the kids go to college. I looked at Nia. Her hands were trembling around the water bottle. She knew. She knew her mother would never have wanted her hard-earned savings gambled away on internet coins. Ruth had scrubbed floors and balanced books to save every dime of that money. Nia, I said, ignoring Brad. I looked directly at my daughter. Nia, look at me. She slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were red. This is your mother's legacy, I said softly. She wanted the kids to be safe. Not rich. Safe. Are you really going to let him gamble with their future? Naya opened her mouth to speak. I saw a flicker of the girl I raised, the girl who had a conscience. But Brad slammed his hand down on the table. It was a sharp, violent crack that made everyone jump. Stop it, Isaiah, Brad shouted. Stop manipulating her. This is exactly why you are unfit. You are stuck in the past. You think safety is a savings account that earns 1% interest while inflation eats you alive. That is why you are poor. That is why you are sitting there in a cheap suit losing your company. He stood up and walked behind Nia's chair, putting his hands on her shoulders. He squeezed them not in a loving way, but in a possessive way. He was marking his territory. Naya needs a future, Isaiah, Brad hissed. You are the past. You are a dinosaur. We are trying to build an empire here and we need capital to do it. Now you can sign the resignation or we can go back to Plan A. We declare you incompetent, we put you in the home and we take control of the trust anyway. It will just take a few months longer. I looked at Nia. She looked down again. The flicker was gone. She was broken. She was his. A profound sadness washed over me. Not for myself, but for her. She was selling her soul to a man who saw her as nothing more than a signatory on a bank account. I took a deep breath. I let my shoulders slump even further. I let my hand shake as I reached for the pen. You are right, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I am the past. I do not understand this new world. I do not want to fight anymore. Brad, his face relaxed. He smiled. That is the smart choice, Isaiah. I pulled the documents closer. I picked up the heavy, expensive pen that Sterling had placed in front of me. I will sign everything I said. The company, the non-compete, the trust. Brad clapped his hands together. Excellent. Let us get this done. But I said, pausing with the pen hovering over the paper. I have one small request. Brad rolled his eyes. What now? I looked at him with wide, fearful eyes. The eyes of an old man terrified of the mailman. The debts, I said. I know the company has lines of credit. I know there are loans for the new trailers. If I sign this, if I am not the CEO anymore, I do not want the bank calling me. I do not want to be responsible if things go wrong. I swallowed hard, adding a dramatic gulp. I just want to live in my house in peace. I do not want to owe anyone anything. Brad laughed. It was a loud, barking laugh that echoed off the glass walls. That is your condition, he asked, looking at his lawyers with amusement. You are worried about the debt. I nodded vigorously. Yes. I want a clause, a waiver. It needs to say that the new owners, that is you and Nia, assume full and total responsibility for all liabilities, debts, and financial obligations of Bishop Hollage Incorporated effective immediately upon signing, and that I am personally indemnified against any claims. Brad waved his hand dismissively. Of course, old man. That is standard. We are buying the assets, we buy the liabilities. That is how business works. He looked at Sterling. Add the clause. Make him happy. Sterling typed furiously on his laptop. He printed out a new page. He slid it over. I read it carefully. It was perfect. It was a complete and total transfer of debt. Every penny the company owed Brad now owed. He was so focused on the assets, on the millions he thought he was getting, that he did not care about the debt. He thought the debt was manageable. He did not know about the loans that were about to be called. He did not know about the lease penalties that were about to hit. I looked at Brad one last time. Are you sure, Brad? You are taking on a lot of weight. Brad leaned back, putting his feet up on the empty chair next to him. Do not worry about me, Isaiah. I know how to leverage debt. It is a tool. You use it to grow. I will have this company refinanced and profitable in 3 months. You just enjoy your retirement. I signed. I signed the transfer. I signed the non-compete. I signed the resignation from the trust. And finally, I signed the waiver that put a noose around his neck. Brad snatched the papers away the second I lifted the pen. He signed them with a flourish, pressing down hard, carving his name into his own destruction. Done, Brad announced. He stood up and buttoned his jacket. He did not offer to shake my hand. He did not say thank you. He just looked at his watch. Nia, let us go. We have a celebration lunch at the Capitol Grill. Nia stood up. She looked at me. Dad, do you have a ride home? I do not need a ride, I said, putting my pen in my pocket. I have my truck. Brad laughed. Drive safe, Isaiah. Don not get lost on the way back to the suburbs. They walked out. The lawyers packed up their briefcases and followed, leaving me alone in the cold conference room. I sat there for a moment listening to the silence. I looked at the copy of the agreement they had left for me. I turned to the page with the liability waiver. Brad's signature was bold and arrogant. He had just personally guaranteed $3.5 million in debt for a company that as of tomorrow morning would have no place to operate. I stood up. I buttoned my shirt. I fixed my tie. I walked to the window and looked down at the city. You wanted the future, Brad, I whispered to the glass. You just bought it. And it is going to cost you everything. I took out my phone and dialed Saul. It is signed Saul. He took the waiver. He took the bait. Saul, his voice crackled in my ear. Did he read the lease? He did not even ask for it, I said. Then God have mercy on his soul, Saul said, because the bank certainly won't. I am sending the eviction notice by courier now. It will arrive at 9 a.m. tomorrow. I hung up. I walked out of the office. The receptionist smiled at me as I passed. Have a nice day, sir. I smiled back. A real smile this time. Oh, I will miss. I will. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor. As the numbers counted down, I felt lighter than I had in years. The grief was still there, the loss of Ruth was still a hole in my heart, but the helplessness was gone. I was not a victim anymore. I was the executioner, and the guillotine blade had just started to fall. I drove to the office at 7 in the evening. Usually at this hour the yard would be quieting down. You would hear the hiss of air brakes as the last trucks rolled in for the night, and the low murmur of drivers swapping stories by the vending machines. It was a holy time of day for me. It was when I could look out the window and see the physical manifestation of 40 years of sweat and prayer. But tonight the yard was not quiet. Even from the street I could hear the bass of loud thumping music. It wasn't the blues or the soul music my drivers listened to. It was electronic dance music, a repetitive soulless pounding that rattled the windows of the building I had built with my own hands. I pulled up to the gate. The Titan security guard recognized my truck this time. He didn't step out to stop me. He just smirked and hit the button to open the gate. Brad must have told them to let me in. Let the old man come and collect his trash. Let him see the new regime. I parked in my spot. The sign still said, "Reserved for Isaiah Bishop, CEO." But someone had already stuck a piece of duct tape over my name and written Brad in thick black marker. It was crude. It was childish. It was exactly what I expected. I walked toward the main entrance. The glass doors were propped open. Inside the lobby looked like a frat house after a football game. There were red plastic cups scattered on the reception desk. There were bottles of champagne, expensive champagne sitting in a bucket of ice on the floor. And there were people. Not my people. Not the men and women with grease under their fingernails and families to feed. These were men in suits that cost more than a driver makes in a month. They were young, loud, and smelled of arrogance. I walked past them. They didn't even look at me. To them, I was just part of the furniture, a janitor coming to clean up their mess. I climbed the stairs to my office. The door was open. I stopped in the doorway, my hand gripping the frame to steady myself. Brad was sitting in my chair, my leather chair that had molded to my back over 2 decades of 14-hour days. He had his feet up on my desk. He was holding a crystal tumbler of whiskey, my whiskey, the bottle I had been saving for my 75th birthday. Around him sat 3 other men. I recognized the type: investment bankers, private equity sharks, men who looked at a company and didn't see people. They saw a carcass to be stripped for meat. To the Empire, Brad shouted, raising his glass. To the Empire, the others chorused, clinking their glasses together, liquid spilling onto my mahogany desk. Brad took a long sip and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He spotted me standing there. For a second, he looked surprised, but then his face settled into that familiar, condescending sneer. "Well, look who it is," Brad boomed, waving his hand toward me like he was introducing a circus act. "Gentlemen, meet the history of Bishop Hallage. Isaiah, come in, come in. Don't be shy. We were just toasting to the future." I didn't say anything. I walked into the room. The air was thick with cigar smoke. They were smoking inside. Ruth would have had a fit. "I am just here for my things," I said, my voice steady. "By all means," Brad said, kicking a cardboard box toward me with the toe of his Italian loafer. "Pack up whatever you want, as long as it is not company property. The laptop stays. The files stay. The contacts stay." I knelt down and unfolded the box. I felt a pair of eyes on me. It was one of Brad's friends, a guy with slicked back hair and a watch the size of a hockey puck. "So this is the father-in-law," the guy asked, not lowering his voice. "The one with the, you know," he tapped his temple, "the dementia signal." Brad laughed. "Yeah. Sad case. But he signed the papers today. Total transfer. We are in the clear." I started putting things in the box. My stapler, a pencil cup Nia had made for me in kindergarten, a paperweight shaped like a truck engine. I moved slowly, listening. I needed to hear it. I needed to hear their plans so that when I destroyed them tomorrow, I would feel no guilt. None at all. So Brad, the slick guy, said, leaning forward, "What is the play? You got the fleet. You got the contracts. But the margins are tight on logistics right now. Fuel is killing everyone." I paused, my hand hovering over a stack of business cards. I waited for Brad's answer. I waited for him to talk about efficiency, about route optimization, about negotiating better fuel rates. Brad took a puff of his cigar and blew the smoke toward the ceiling. "Margins. Tyler, you are thinking too small. I am not running a trucking company. Who wants to deal with unions and DOT regulations and drivers whining about overtime?" He leaned in, lowering his voice, but not enough. "The real value isn't the trucks," Brad said, his eyes gleaming. "It is the land." I froze. "We are sitting on 5 acres of prime industrial real estate," Brad continued, gesturing to the window. 5 acres, right next to the upcoming rail expansion. I had a developer call me yesterday. He wants to put up a mixed-use complex, lofts, retail, maybe a brewery. "But wait," another guy asked. "What about the trucks? What about the operations?" Brad shrugged. "We sell the fleet. Piece by piece. We get what we can. The older trucks go to scrap. The newer ones we auction off to competitors. We fire the drivers. Most of them are too old anyway. Heavy liabilities on the insurance. We dissolve the workforce." And then Tyler asked. And then Brad smiled a wide, predatory grin. "We sell the dirt to the developer for $8 million. Cash. I pay off the debts Isaiah left and I walk away with $5 million clear profit. No work, no trucks. Just cash." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. He wasn't going to save the company. He wasn't going to modernize it. He was going to kill it. He was going to fire Sam. He was going to fire Miller. He was going to take 40 years of community building and turn it into a parking lot for a brewery. And the Porsche. Tyler laughed. Brad toasted the air. A 911 GT3, matte black. It is already on order. I stood up. My knees popped. I put the last item in the box. It was a framed photograph, black and white, taken in 1982. It was me and Ruth standing in front of our very first truck. She was wearing a flower in her hair. I was wearing a work shirt with my name stitched on the pocket. We looked tired, but we looked unstoppable. Brad watched me pick it up. "You can take that," he said dismissively. "Sentimental value only. Zero market worth." I looked at the photo. He was right. To him it was worth zero. To me, it was worth more than his life. I tucked the photo under my arm. I picked up the box. I looked at Brad. He was king of the hill. He was sitting on a throne of lies, surrounded by jesters. "You really think you have it all figured out, don't you, Brad?" I asked. Brad chuckled. "I have the papers, Isaiah. I have the signature. I have the company. Yeah, I think I figured it out. Now run along. We have real business to discuss." I walked to the door. I stopped and looked back at the office one last time. I memorized the layout. I memorized the location of the safe. I memorized the look on Brad's face. I looked at the floorboards. Beneath this floor was the foundation. Beneath the foundation was the earth, the dirt, my dirt. "Enjoy the party, gentlemen," I said softly. I walked out into the hallway. The bass music was still thumping downstairs. I walked past the empty cubicles where my dispatchers used to sit. I walked past the wall of Employee of the Month plaques. I whispered to the empty air, "I am sorry, guys. It is going to get ugly for a few days. But hold on. I am coming back." I walked out the front door. The cool night air hit my face. The guard at the gate watched me approach. "Leaving so soon, Mr. Bishop?" he asked, smacking gum. I put the box in the passenger seat of my truck. I climbed in. I started the engine. It roared to life, a deep guttural sound that felt like a growl. "Yes," I said to the guard. "I am leaving. But do me a favor." "What?" he asked. "Tell your boss to enjoy the view tonight," I said, "because tomorrow the landscape changes." The guard rolled his eyes and turned back to his phone. He didn't understand. None of them did. I pulled out of the gate. I drove down the street watching the lights of my office fade in the rearview mirror. Brad was celebrating. He was drinking my whiskey and planning to fire my friends. He was dreaming of a Porsche. He didn't know that at 9 a.m. tomorrow a courier named Mike was going to hand him an envelope. He didn't know that the land he was planning to sell for $8 million wasn't his to sell. He didn't know that he had just personally guaranteed millions of dollars of debt for a company that was effectively homeless. I reached over and touched the glass of the photograph next to me. "We got him, Ruth," I whispered. "We got him cold." I turned the radio on. I didn't play sad music. I found a station playing old-school funk. James Brown, The Big Payback. I tapped my fingers on the steering wheel. "Good luck with the empty shell, Brad," I said aloud. "Good luck with the ghost." I drove home into the night, and for the first time in weeks, I slept like a baby. The kind of sleep you get when you know the storm is coming, and you are the one holding the thunderbolt. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like ascending to a different planet. Down on the street level, Atlanta was hot, humid, and smelled of asphalt and exhaust. It was the smell of work. Up here in the climate-controlled sanctuary of the law firm Sterling and Associates, the air was scrubbed clean of any human scent. It smelled of lemon polish and money. I stepped out of the elevator. The receptionist, a young woman who looked like she had been 3D printed from a catalog of corporate perfection, smiled at me without her eyes crinkling. "Mr. Bishop," she chirped, "they are waiting for you in conference room A." I nodded, clutching my old leather briefcase. It was scuffed and worn, the stitching fraying at the corners. Inside it was empty. I didn't need to bring anything. I was here to give everything away. I walked down the long hallway. The walls were lined with abstract art that probably cost more than my first 3 trucks combined. I saw my reflection in the glass partitions. I saw an old man in a gray suit that was a little too loose around the shoulders. I saw a man walking with a slight stoop, a hesitation in his step. Good, I thought. Let them see the weakness. Let them see the prey. I pushed open the heavy oak doors. The room was vast. One entire wall was floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the city I helped build. But sitting at the long marble table, Brad and Nia didn't look at the view. They looked at the stacks of paper in front of them. There were 3 piles. Tall, white, ominous towers of legalese. Brad looked up as I entered. He checked his watch. He was wearing a new watch today, a Rolex Daytona. He must have bought it on credit, anticipating the windfall he was about to receive. "You are late, Isaiah," Brad said, not bothering to stand up. "We have the notary here already. Let us get moving. I have a lunch reservation at 12:30 at Bones. I do not want to lose our table." I shuffled to the chair at the far end of the table. I took my time sitting down, groaning slightly as my knees bent. I saw Nia flinch. She was sitting next to Brad, staring at her hands. She looked smaller than she did yesterday. Guilt is a heavy coat to wear, and she was drowning in it. "I'm sorry," I mumbled, placing my briefcase on the floor. Traffic was bad, and I forgot where I parked. Brad rolled his eyes and looked at his lawyer, Mr. Sterling. "See," he mouthed. Sterling slid the first stack of papers toward me. It made a heavy sliding sound across the polished marble. "This is the transfer of equity agreement, Mr. Bishop Sterling," said his voice smooth and oily. "It formally transfers 100% of your shares in Bishop Logistics Incorporated to the holding company controlled by Brad and Naya." I put on my reading glasses. I took them out of the case slowly. I breathed on the lenses. I wiped them with my tie. I could feel Brad vibrating with impatience. "Just sign the tabbed pages," Dad Nia said softly. "You do not have to read it all. We went over this." I looked at her over the rim of my glasses. "I built this company with a handshake, Nia," I said, my voice trembling just enough. "I want to see what I am signing." Brad sighed loudly. He drummed his fingers on the table. Tap, tap, tap. I opened the first page. "Whereas Isaiah Bishop is the sole proprietor, whereas the transferee desires to acquire..." The words swam before my eyes. Not because I couldn't read them, but because they represented the death of a dream. But then I remembered the camera footage. I remembered the fake dementia diagnosis. I remembered the look on Brad's face when he mocked my drivers. I picked up the pen. It was a heavy, expensive fountain pen. My hand hovered over the signature line. I let it shake. A rhythmic, palsied tremor. Brad leaned forward, his eyes locked on the pen tip. He looked like a wolf watching a wounded deer. I lowered the pen. The tip touched the paper. Then I let it slip. Clatter. The pen rolled across the marble floor, spinning away under the table. "Oops," I said, staring at my empty hand. My grip. It is not what it used to be. "For God's sake," Brad snapped. He pushed his chair back and dove under the table to retrieve the pen. He came up red-faced, dusting off his knees. He slammed the pen back down in front of me. "Hold it tight, Isaiah. Just make a mark. It does not have to be a masterpiece." I picked up the pen again. I gripped it with both hands like a child learning to write. I signed, "Isaiah." I paused. I looked up at Brad. "What is the date?" I asked. "June 16th. Brad hissed through gritted teeth. I wrote the date. Then I wrote my last name. Bishop. "One down," Sterling said, flipping the page. 50 to go. The next hour was a masterclass in torture. I read random paragraphs out loud. I asked questions about clauses that didn't matter. I stopped to drink water, spilling a little on my tie. Brad was losing his mind. He kept checking his watch. He kept texting under the table. "Isaiah, please." Brad finally exploded when I paused on page 30. "We are buying the company. We are taking the debt. We are giving you a life estate in the house. It is a win-win. Why are you dragging this out?" I looked at him. I saw the sweat beading on his forehead. He was so close to the finish line he could taste it. "I just want to make sure I am safe," I said. "The debts, the loans." "We went over this," Brad shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "Look, here is the indemnity clause." He flipped to the back of the stack. "The buyer assumes all liabilities, known and unknown, current and future, associated with the operations of Bishop Logistics Incorporated." He pointed to his own signature, which was already there. Bold, aggressive. I signed it, "Isaiah. I am on the hook, not you. If the company goes bankrupt tomorrow, the bank comes after me. Are you happy now?" I looked at the clause. It was beautiful. It was the rope he would hang himself with. "Yes," I said softly. "I am happy." I signed the page. Then came the resignation letter. "I, Isaiah Bishop, hereby resign as CEO." This one hurt. Even as an act, it hurt. I was signing away my identity, but I reminded myself I wasn't resigning from being the boss. I was resigning from being the victim. I signed it. Then the non-compete. 10 years. I signed it. Finally, the last page, the transfer of the bank accounts. Sterling gathered the documents. He stamped them with his notary seal. Thump, thump, thump. The sound echoed like a gavel. "Congratulations," Sterling said, offering a thin smile. "The transaction is complete." Brad let out a whoop of joy. He stood up and threw his arms in the air. "Yes," he shouted. Finally, he turned to Nia and pulled her up for a hug. She looked limp in his arms, but he didn't notice. He was too busy staring at the stack of signed papers like they were bars of gold. He looked at me. His demeanor changed instantly. The impatience was gone, replaced by the cool, dismissive arrogance of a conqueror. "Well," Isaiah Brad said, buttoning his jacket, "I would invite you to join us for lunch, but I know how you get in crowded restaurants. Plus, we have a lot of strategy to discuss. New era, you know." He picked up the folder containing the executed contracts. He held them to his chest. "You should head home," he said. "Take a nap. You look exhausted." I stood up. My knees didn't creak this time. I looked at Brad. I looked at the papers in his hand. "You have everything you wanted, Brad," I said. "You have the company, you have the name, you have the accounts." Brad grinned. "I do. And do not worry, I will send you a postcard from the new headquarters once we sell the land and move to a modern office." Sell the land. He was still saying it. He still didn't know. I picked up my empty briefcase. "Goodbye, Nia," I said. "Goodbye, Dad," she whispered. I walked to the door. Brad didn't watch me leave. He was already on the phone. "Tyler. It is done. The ink is dry. Call the developer. Tell him the land is his for $8 million. Yes, 8. We close next week." I closed the heavy oak door behind me, cutting off his voice. I walked back down the hallway. The receptionist smiled at me again. "Did everything go well, Mr. Bishop?" she asked. I stopped. I looked at her. "It went exactly according to plan," I said. I got into the elevator. I pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors slid shut, I checked my own watch. It was 11:45. Saul Cohen was scheduled to arrive at Brad's office at 12:15. He would be carrying a single envelope. Inside was the eviction notice. Brad was going to lunch to celebrate becoming a millionaire. By the time he ordered his appetizer, he would be a man with $3 million in debt and no place to park his trucks. I leaned my head back against the elevator wall and closed my eyes. The signing was over. The acting was over. Now the real show was about to begin. The silence in the conference room was heavy, broken only by the sound of Mr. Sterling gathering the signed contracts. He stacked them into neat piles, tapping the edges against the marble table to align them. To Brad, that sound must have sounded like the stacking of gold bars. To me, it sounded like the click of a mousetrap snapping shut. Brad stood up and stretched his arms over his head, letting out a long, satisfied groan. He walked over to the window and looked out at the Atlanta skyline, his back turned to me. He was already mentally redecorating his life. He was probably picking out the color of the leather seats for his new Porsche. "Well, gentlemen," Brad said, turning around with a bright plastic smile, "that concludes our business. Isaiah, I know this is a difficult day for you, handing over the reins and all, but trust me, it is for the best. The company is in good hands. My hands." He walked back to the head of the table and placed his hand on the leather chair. "My chair. Or at least the chair that used to be mine. Now, if you will excuse us," Brad continued, checking his new Rolex again. "We have a lot of work to do. Restructuring starts immediately. I need to make some calls to the bank before lunch. So, Isaiah, I am going to have to ask you to leave my office." He emphasized the word "my." He savored it. He wanted me to feel the eviction. He wanted me to feel small. I stood up slowly, picking up my empty briefcase. I looked at Nia. She was staring at the signed papers, a look of nausea on her face. She knew she had just betrayed her father, but she didn't know she had just bankrupted her husband. "I will be going then," I said softly. I turned toward the door. Brad was already reaching for his phone, dismissing me entirely. But I didn't leave. I stopped. I looked at Saul Cohen, who was sitting quietly in the corner. Saul hadn't said a word during the entire signing. He had just sat there looking like a tired old man in a rumpled suit, watching the sharks circle. But now Saul moved. He reached into his battered briefcase. He didn't pull out a file. He didn't pull out a legal pad. He pulled out a single bright red envelope. It was thick. It was ominous. In the sterile gray and white world of the law firm, that red envelope looked like a drop of fresh blood on snow. "One moment, Mr. Bradley," Saul said. His voice was no longer the raspy mumble of an old man. It was sharp, clear. It cut through the air like a gavel. Brad froze. He looked up from his phone, annoyed. "What is it now?" Brad snapped. "The deal is done. The papers are signed. We have a reservation at Bones in 20 minutes. Saul didn't look at Brad. He looked at Mr. Sterling, Brad's high-priced lawyer. "Just a formality, Mr. Sterling," Saul said, sliding the red envelope across the polished marble table. "Since the ownership of the operating entity has officially changed hands, we are required by law to serve notice regarding the physical assets. Sterling frowned. He reached out and stopped the envelope with his hand. He looked at it warily. Lawyers have an instinct for danger. They can smell a trap before they see it. And Mr. Sterling was smelling something burning. "What is this?" Sterling asked, his voice losing some of its smoothness. Saul smiled. It was a cold, wolfish smile. "Open it," Saul said. Brad walked over, impatient. "Open it, Sterling. It is probably just some transfer of keys or alarm codes. Let us get this over with." Sterling opened the envelope. He pulled out a single document. It was printed on heavy bond paper. I watched Sterling's face. This was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the moment that was worth 40 years of labor. Sterling read the header. His eyes widened. He read the first paragraph. His face went pale. He read the second paragraph. His hands started to tremble. He looked up at Saul. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like he had just swallowed a piece of glass. What Brad asked, sensing the shift in the room. "What does it say?" Sterling didn't answer. He couldn't. He was too busy rereading the document, praying that he had misunderstood the words. But the words were clear. I knew them by heart. Saul leaned forward, clasping his hands on the table. "Since Mr. Sterling seems to be at a loss for words, allow me to explain," Saul said calmly. "That is a formal notice of lease termination and demand for immediate vacation of premises." Brad laughed. It was a nervous, confused laugh. "Lease termination? What are you talking about? We own the company. We own the building. We own everything." "No," Saul said. And this time he looked directly at Brad. "You own Bishop Logistics Incorporated. That is the operating company. You own the trucks. You own the employee contracts. You own the debts." Saul pointed a finger at the floor. "But you do not own the land. You do not own the building. You do not own the maintenance bays. Those assets are held by a completely separate legal entity, the Isaiah Bishop Land Trust." Brad looked at me. His eyes were wild. "What that is a lie. It is all the same company." I spoke up then. My voice was strong. The act was over. "No, Brad," I said. "It is not. We separated the assets in 1995 to protect the property from liability lawsuits. Standard asset protection strategy. Your due diligence team should have caught that." I looked at Sterling. He was wiping sweat from his forehead. He knew he had messed up. He had been so focused on acquiring the equity that he hadn't checked the lease agreements. But the lease transfers," Brad shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "The company has a lease. We just keep paying rent." Saul shook his head. He looked almost sad for them. "Almost. Actually, the master lease agreement expired on May 31st, Saul said. Since then, the company has been occupying the premises on a month-to-month tenancy at will." Saul pointed to the paper in Sterling's hand. "And as the sole trustee of the land trust, Mr. Bishop has decided to terminate that tenancy, effective immediately." Brad snatched the paper from Sterling. He read it furiously, his eyes darting back and forth. "You cannot do this," Brad sputtered. "We have 50 trucks parked there. We have dispatchers. We have a business to run." "You have 48 hours, Saul said. "The notice gives you 2 days to remove all corporate property from the land. That includes the vehicles, the office equipment, and the personnel. Any property remaining on the premises after 48 hours will be considered abandoned and will be seized by the land trust to cover unpaid holdover rent." Brad looked at Sterling. "Fix this," he screamed. "Tell him he cannot do this." Sterling looked defeated. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Technically, he can," Sterling whispered. "If the lease expired, and if the entities are separate, he has the right to evict the tenant." Brad turned to me. His face was red, his veins bulging in his neck. "You are evicting your own company. You are evicting me. I am evicting a tenant who I no longer wish to do business with," I said calmly. "But where am I supposed to go?" Brad yelled. "There is no other yard in Atlanta that can take 50 trucks on 2 days' notice. We will be shut down. We will be in breach of contract with every client we have." "That sounds like an operational problem," I said, using the same dismissive tone he had used with me for weeks. "And since I am no longer the CEO, operational problems are not my concern." I picked up my hat and placed it on my head. However, I added, pausing at the door, "I believe you signed a waiver regarding liabilities. I hope your personal assets are liquid, Brad, because when those trucks stop moving, the penalties from your clients are going to be substantial. And since you personally guaranteed the company debt..." I let the sentence hang in the air. Brad looked at the signed papers on the table, the papers he had been celebrating 5 minutes ago. Suddenly they didn't look like gold bars anymore. They looked like a death warrant. He looked at Nia. She was crying. She understood. "Dad," Nia sobbed. "Please, you cannot do this." I looked at my daughter, the daughter who sat by while her husband called me senile, the daughter who brought me brochures for a nursing home. "I didn't do this, Nia," I said. "You did. You wanted the company. You wanted the control. You wanted to be independent of the past." I opened the door. "Well, you are independent now. You have the company. You just don't have a home for it." I walked out of the conference room. Behind me, I heard Brad screaming at Sterling. I heard the sound of a glass shattering against the wall. Saul followed me out, closing the door gently behind him. He looked at me and winked. "Lunch?" Saul asked. "I think so," I said. "But not at Bones. Let us go to that diner on 4th Street. I have a sudden craving for a burger." We walked to the elevator. The silence of the hallway was different now. It wasn't heavy. It was electric. I pressed the down button. Brad was trapped in a glass tower with a company that was bleeding to death, and he was holding the knife. I had given him exactly what he asked for, and now he was going to choke on it. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the server banks in the closet down the hall. Mr. Sterling, the man who had just arrogantly stamped the final contracts, was staring at the single sheet of paper Saul had slid across the table. His face was undergoing a transformation that was terrifying to watch. The blood didn't just drain from his skin, it seemed to evaporate, leaving him the color of old ash. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock, but no sound came out. He was a high-priced corporate attorney, a man who billed $800 an hour, and he had just realized he had committed the kind of malpractice that ends careers. Brad was standing over him, his hands gripping the back of the leather chair. He didn't understand yet. He thought it was a minor hiccup. He thought it was a zoning issue or a parking permit. He didn't know he was looking at his own execution order. "What is it, Sterling?" Brad demanded, his voice rising in pitch. "Why do you look like you are having a stroke?" "Read it to me." Sterling couldn't speak. His hand, which was holding the paper, started to shake, a violent, uncontrollable tremor that made the paper rattle like dry leaves in a storm. He looked up at Brad, and there was genuine fear in his eyes. Not professional concern, fear. "Give me that," Brad snapped. He reached down and snatched the paper from Sterling's trembling fingers. He held it up to the light. He squinted. He was impatient, angry, and completely unprepared. I watched him. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest. I watched his eyes scan the header. I watched him read the first line. I watched the exact moment the words hit his brain. His eyebrows furrowed. He shook his head slightly as if to clear a sudden fog. He read it again. And then a third time. "This makes no sense," Brad whispered. This has to be a typo." "Read it out loud," Mr. Bradley Saul said. His voice was calm, cutting through the tension like a razor blade. "Read clause 4.2. Brad looked at Saul with pure hatred. Then he looked at the paper again. He began to read, his voice wavering, losing all of that bluster and confidence he had flaunted for weeks. "Pursuant to clause 4.2 of the Master Ground Lease Agreement dated June 1st, 1995. Brad read, stumbling over the legal phrasing. "The rights of use and occupancy regarding the entirety of the premises, including the vehicle maintenance bays, the administrative offices, and the secured parking lot, are granted exclusively to Bishop Logistics Incorporated, solely under the direct management and majority control of Isaiah Bishop." He paused. He swallowed hard. "Keep reading," Saul urged gently. "The good part is next." Brad licked his lips. They were dry. "In the event that the controlling interest of the tenant entity is transferred, assigned, or sold to any party other than the designated successor." Brad stopped. He looked up at me. "Who is the designated successor?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Read the parenthetical," I said softly. Brad looked back down. "Designated successor defined herein as Ruth Bishop, wife of the grantor." He stared at the name. Ruth Bishop. My wife. The woman he had disrespected at her own funeral. The woman whose savings he wanted to gamble on crypto. She was the only person on earth who could have taken that company and kept the land. And she was gone. Brad continued reading, but his voice was getting louder now, fueled by a rising panic. "If such a transfer occurs without the express written consent of the land trust, this lease shall automatically and immediately terminate. The tenant must vacate the premises and remove all assets, vehicles, and equipment within 48 hours of said transfer. He stopped again. The room was spinning for him. 48 hours. 50 trucks. Nowhere to go. But he wasn't done. There was one more sentence. The sentence that Saul had written late one night over a bottle of cheap whiskey, laughing about how we needed a poison pill to protect the family legacy. Furthermore, Brad read, choking on the words. Due to the breach of the non-transferability covenant, the tenant agrees to pay immediate liquidated damages to the land trust in the amount of... He stopped. He couldn't say the number. How much, Brad? I asked. How much is the penalty? Brad looked at me. His eyes were wet. $2 million, he whispered. He dropped the paper on the table. It floated down and landed on top of the pile of contracts he had just signed. The contracts where he had personally guaranteed every debt and liability of the company. $2 million, Saul repeated, leaning back and folding his hands behind his head. Payable immediately upon breach, which according to the timestamp on those documents you just signed happened exactly 12 minutes ago. Brad stared at the wall. For a moment, nobody moved. The reality of the situation was too big to process. He had just bought a company for millions of dollars. He had taken on $3 million in debt. And now, 12 minutes later, that company was homeless, unable to operate, and owed another $2 million in fines. Then the explosion came. "What the hell is this?" Brad screamed. He grabbed the paper and crumpled it in his fist. He threw it at Sterling. "You told me this was clean. You told me we owned everything. How did you miss a $2 million poison pill?" Sterling was wiping his face with a handkerchief. I didn't see the original lease, Mr. Bradley. We only reviewed the corporate documents. We assumed the land was part of the corporate assets. It usually is in family businesses." "You assumed?" Brad roared. "I pay you $800 an hour to assume." He spun around to face me. He looked like a madman. His tie was crooked. His hair was messy. The cool, collected tycoon was gone. In his place was a terrified child. "You set me up," Brad hissed. "You knew. You sat there and let me sign those papers knowing this would happen." "I didn't set you up, Brad," I said calmly. "I protected my assets. That clause was written 30 years ago. It was written to stop hostile takeovers. It was written to stop corporate raiders from coming in, stripping the company, and selling the land." I stood up and walked over to the window looking out at the city. "I just never thought the hostile raider would be my own son-in-law," I added. "But I bought the company," Brad yelled, slamming his fist on the table. "I own the trucks, I own the contracts, I have to have a place to park them. You cannot just kick me out," I turned back to him. "I can," I said, "and I am. You have 48 hours, Brad. If those trucks are not off my land by noon on Wednesday, I will have them towed, and I will send the bill for the towing to you along with the invoice for the $2 million. "But where am I supposed to go?" he pleaded. His anger was breaking into desperation. "There is no industrial space available in Atlanta," I checked. "That is why the land was so valuable." "That sounds like a CEO problem," I said. "And as you pointed out so clearly yesterday, I am not the CEO anymore. I am just a landlord protecting his property." Naya finally spoke up. She was shaking. "Dad," she said, her voice cracking, "this will ruin us. $2 million. We don't have that. Brad put everything into the acquisition. If we can't operate, if we can't move the freight..." "Then you shouldn't have been so eager to push me out," I said. I looked at Naya. I looked at the tears running down her face. It hurt me, it truly did, but a surgeon has to cut to cure, and this cancer had to be removed. "You stood by him, Nia," I said gently. "When he called me senile, when he tried to put me in a home, when he insulted your mother's memory, you chose his greed over my loyalty. Now you have to live with the consequences of his business acumen." Brad sank into his chair. He put his head in his hands. "I can't move 50 trucks in 2 days," he mumbled into his palms. "I can't. The logistics, the drivers, half of them hate me already." I picked up my briefcase. "You are the future of logistics, Brad," I said. "I am sure you will figure it out. Use some of that crypto money you were talking about." I signaled to Saul. We were done here. As we walked to the door, Brad looked up one last time. "I will sue you," he said. "I will sue you for bad faith. I will tie this up in court for years." "You can try," Saul said, stopping at the threshold. But remember, Mr. Bradley, you signed a binding arbitration agreement, and you signed a waiver of liability, and you personally guaranteed the debt. Every day you spend in court is a day your trucks aren't moving, and a day the bank gets closer to foreclosing on your house to pay back that loan. Saul smiled. If I were you, I would stop threatening and start packing. You have a lot of boxes to move. We left the room. We left them in the wreckage of their own ambition. As the heavy door clicked shut, I heard Nia start to scream. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was a scream of rage. She was screaming at Brad. I walked down the hall, my step lighter than it had been in years. Did you see his face? Saul asked, pressing the elevator button. I saw it, I said. It was the look of a man who thought he was holding a royal flush only to realize he was playing Uno. We stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. Now comes the hard part, I said. What is that? Saul asked. Watching them drown, I said, and waiting for them to realize that the only person who can throw them a life preserver is the man they tried to bury. I checked my watch. The 48-hour clock had started ticking, and for Brad, time was running out faster than he could ever imagine. The sound of my glasses case snapping shut was not loud, but in that silent room it sounded like a gunshot. I slowly took the wire-rimmed spectacles off my nose. I folded them deliberately, one arm, then the other. I placed them into the leather case and slid it into my breast pocket. Then I did something that made Nia gasp. I sat up. I did not sit up like the 70-year-old man with a bad back and a foggy memory that I had been playing for weeks. I sat up straight, my shoulders squared, my chin lifted. The slight tremor in my right hand, the one I had practiced for hours in front of the mirror, vanished instantly. My hands were steady as stone as I clasped them on the marble table. I looked at Brad. I did not look at him with fear or confusion. I looked at him with the cold, hard stare of a man who had negotiated contracts with steel unions and navigated recessions while Brad was still learning to tie his shoes. The color in Brad's face was oscillating between a sickly white and a flushed panic red. He was holding the eviction notice like it was a live grenade. I do not understand, he stammered, looking at me and then back at his lawyer. You said you were tired. You said you did not understand business anymore. I smiled. It was a thin, razor-sharp smile. I said I was tired of fighting you, Brad. I said, my voice dropping an octave, deeply resonant and completely clear. I never said I was stupid. And I never said I did not understand business. In fact, I think it is you who needs a lesson in economics one-on-one. I stood up. I walked slowly around the table toward him. He shrank back in his chair, his expensive suit suddenly looking too big for him. You see, Brad, I continued, pacing the floor like a professor in a lecture hall. You made a classic rookie mistake. You confused the business with the infrastructure. You looked at Bishop Haulage and you saw the revenue. You saw the shiny trucks. You saw the client list. And you thought that was the asset. I stopped right behind his chair and leaned down, whispering into his ear. But in logistics, the trucks are not the asset. The trucks are the liability. They break down. They burn fuel. They need insurance. They depreciate every single mile they drive. I straightened up and pointed out the window at the city below. The asset. Brad is the land. It is the permit to park 50 heavy industrial vehicles in a city that hates heavy traffic. It is the maintenance bays that are grandfathered in under zoning laws from 1980. It is the dirt. And you were so busy trying to steal the fruit that you forgot to check who owned the tree. Brad slammed the paper down. This is semantics, he yelled, his voice cracking. It is a technicality. I own the company. I have the right to operate. No, I corrected him calmly. You have the obligation to operate. You have contracts with Walmart and Amazon that require 98% on-time delivery. If you miss those windows because your trucks are being towed, they will fine you, and then they will cancel your contract. I turned to Mr. Sterling, who was still wiping sweat from his upper lip. Tell him, Mr. Sterling. Explain to your client what he actually bought today. Sterling cleared his throat. He looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Mr. Bradley, he whispered. Technically, Mr. Bishop is correct. You purchased the equity of the operating entity. That includes the fleet, the employment contracts, and the accounts receivable. But it also includes the accounts payable and the operational requirements. Without a valid lease for the facility, the operating entity is, well, it is in immediate distress. Distress. Brad laughed hysterically. Distress is when you have a flat tire. This is sabotage. He turned to Nia, who was weeping silently into her hands. Did you know about this? He screamed at her. Did you know your father was planning to bankrupt us? Nia looked up, her mascara running down her cheeks. She looked at me with betrayal in her eyes. Dad, she sobbed. How could you? We have a mortgage. We have debts. If the company stops running, we lose everything. I looked at my daughter. The pain in my chest was real this time. But I remembered the nursing home brochures. I remembered the way she looked at the floor when Brad insulted me. You chose your partner, Nia, I said softly. You stood by him when he called me incompetent. You stood by him when he forged my signature on bank transfers. You wanted to run the company. Well, now you are running it. I turned back to Brad. Here is your reality, Brad. You have 50 tractor trailers. Each one is 70 feet long. You have 48 hours to move them off my property. Where am I supposed to put them? Brad pleaded, his arrogance completely gone, replaced by sheer desperation. You know there is no space. The nearest industrial lot is in Macon. That is 2 hours away. Then you better start driving, I said. But the drivers, Brad cried. I cannot get 50 drivers in 2 hours. Half of them are on the road. Then you better start making phone calls, I said, checking my watch. Because at 12 noon on Wednesday I am closing the gate. Any truck left inside becomes the property of the land trust as collateral for the unpaid rent. And any truck left outside on the street will be impounded by the city. I already called the mayor. He is an old friend. He is expecting a traffic jam. Brad looked at the pile of contracts on the table, the contracts he had signed with such flourish. I rescind the deal, he stammered, reaching for the papers. I take it back. I am not buying it. The deal is off. Saul Cohen stepped forward then. He placed his hand firmly on top of the documents. I am afraid it is too late for that. Mr. Bradley, Saul said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. The transfer is executed. The notary seal is dry. You are the legal owner of Bishop Logistics Incorporated. And Saul added, reaching for the specific page with the indemnity clause. Don't forget this, little beauty. You personally guaranteed the debts. Brad looked at the waiver I had begged him for. The waiver he thought was an old man, his fear of the bank. You knew, he whispered, looking at me with horror. You knew the loans would be called. I nodded. The bank has a covenant, I explained. If I leave the company, they have the right to demand full repayment of the $3.5 million line of credit. Since I just resigned and you just bought the company, that debt is now yours. And since you have no facility to operate from, the bank will consider the collateral distressed. They will be calling you by this afternoon. I picked up my briefcase. I felt lighter, stronger. So let us recap, I said, counting on my fingers. You have $3.5 million in debt. You have a $2 million lease penalty. You have 50 homeless trucks. You have no drivers because you plan to fire them. And you have no land. I leaned in close to his face. I could smell the fear on him. It smelled like sweat and expensive cologne. You wanted a liquidation, Brad, I asked. You wanted to strip the company for parts. Well, congratulations. You are about to get the most thorough liquidation in history. Only it is your assets that are going to be liquidated. Your condo, your car, your watch. I tapped the face of his new Rolex. Nice watch, by the way. You should pawn it. You are going to need the gas money. I walked to the door. Nia reached out and grabbed my sleeve. Dad, please, she begged. Stop this. We will give it back. We will tear up the papers. Just let us go back to how it was. I gently removed her hand from my arm. I cannot do that, Nia, I said. You wanted me to retire. You wanted me to rest. So I am going to go home and rest. I have a lot of gardening to do. I looked at Brad one last time. He was slumped in his chair, staring at the wall, catatonic. Tick-tock, Brad, I said. 47 hours and 58 minutes left. I walked out of the conference room. Saul followed me, closing the heavy oak door on the sound of Nia is wailing. We walked down the hallway in silence. The receptionist looked up as we passed. Have a nice lunch, Mr. Bishop, she asked. The best I have had in years, I said. We got into the elevator. As the doors slid shut, I let out a long breath. That was brutal, Saul said quietly. It was necessary, I replied. He is going to lose everything, Saul said. No, I said, staring at the numbers counting down. He is going to lose everything he tried to steal. There is a difference. I thought about the trucks parked in my yard. My trucks. Saul, I said, get the gate codes changed immediately and call Sam the guard. Tell him he is rehired and give him a raise. I want him at the front gate in an hour. What are you going to do? Saul asked. I am going to go home and wait, I said. Wait for what? For the fire sale, I said. Because in about 2 days there is going to be a trucking company for sale very cheap. And I might just be in the market to buy it back. The elevator reached the lobby. I walked out into the sunlight. The city noise washed over me. It sounded like music. I had walked in as a victim. I was walking out as a victor. But the war was not over. The enemy was wounded, but not dead. And I knew Brad. A cornered rat bites. The next 48 hours were going to be chaos, and I was ready for it. The elevator doors had not even closed before I heard Brad screaming into his phone. He was pacing around the conference room like a trapped animal, his expensive Italian leather shoes squeaking against the marble floor. I held the door open with my hand. I wanted to hear this. I wanted to witness the moment the second domino fell. Get me the vice president of commercial lending, Brad roared into his cell phone. I do not care if he is at lunch. This is Brad Bradley, the new owner of Bishop Logistics. I have a situation here, and I need an immediate bridge loan. He listened for a moment, his face turning a shade of purple that looked dangerous. What do you mean you cannot authorize it? I have $3 million in assets. I have the trucks. I have the contracts. Saul Cohen stood beside me, checking his cuticles. He looked bored, but I knew he was counting the seconds. He reached into his briefcase again. He pulled out one last document. It was a thin sheet of paper, unassuming, but it was the nail in the coffin, Mr. Bradley. Saul called out, his voice cutting through Brad's frantic shouting. Brad spun around, lowering the phone but not hanging up. What? Brad snapped. What else do you have? Another eviction notice. Another parking ticket. Get out of here. I am trying to fix your mess. Saul walked back into the room. He moved slowly, deliberately. He placed the paper on the table right next to the crumpled eviction notice. I believe the person on the other end of that line is Mr. Henderson from First City Bank. Is that correct? Saul asked. Brad blinked, confused. Yes. How did you know? Because Saul smiled. I faxed him a copy of your resignation letter and the stock transfer agreement about 10 minutes ago. Brad went pale. He put the phone back to his ear. Hello, Mr. Henderson. I watched Brad's face crumble. He listened to whatever the banker was saying. His knees actually buckled. He slumped against the edge of the table, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor, the phone still pressed to his ear. But that is impossible, Brad whispered. We are current on payments. You cannot call the loan. I just bought the company. He listened for another 10 seconds. Then he dropped the phone. It clattered onto the marble, the voice of the banker still tinny and audible, asking if anyone was there. Brad looked up at me. His eyes were wide, vacant holes of shock. They called the loan, Brad whispered. They called the entire line of credit. $3.5 million. Due immediately. Nia let out a gasp. She covered her mouth with both hands. $3 million. We do not have $3 million. Why? Brad asked, looking at Saul. Why would they do that? We have perfect credit. Saul tapped the paper he had just put on the table. It is called a key man clause, Mr. Bradley. Saul leaned down, looking Brad right in the eye. Most commercial loans for family businesses are built on relationships. The bank trusted Isaiah Bishop. They knew his character. They knew his history. They did not lend money to a logo. They lent money to the man. Saul straightened up and adjusted his tie. Clause 11 of the loan agreement states that if Isaiah Bishop ceases to be the active chief executive officer, or if his ownership stake falls below 51%, the bank considers that a material change in risk. It gives them the right to accelerate the debt. That means they do not have to wait for monthly payments. They want all their money back. Today. I stepped forward. The room felt cold despite the midday sun streaming through the windows. I tried to tell you, Brad, I said softly. I asked you about the debts. I asked you if you were sure. Brad scrambled to his feet. He grabbed the loan document Saul had put down. He read it frantically. Acceleration of debt. Immediate repayment, he muttered. Then he stopped. He looked at the stack of papers he had signed earlier. The papers where he had waived all due diligence. The papers where he had indemnified me. Oh my God, Brad breathed. Saul nodded. Congratulations, Mr. Bradley. Let us do the math. You have a $2 million penalty for the lease violation. You have a $3.5 million demand from the bank. That is $5.5 million in immediate liabilities. Saul looked around the fancy office. And since you currently have no place to park your trucks to generate revenue, and since the bank has likely already frozen the corporate operating accounts to secure their funds, you are effectively insolvent. Brad looked at Nia. Nia looked at me. And then she broke. It wasn't a cry of sadness. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated victimhood. "You licked us!" Nia shrieked. She ran toward me, her fists clenched. She stopped just short of hitting me, her chest heaving. "You licked us! Dad, you planned this. You knew about the lease. You knew about the loan. You sat there and pretended to be sick. You pretended to be weak." She turned to Brad, gesturing wildly. "He set us up. He wanted to ruin us. How could you do this to your own family? We are your children." I looked at my daughter. I looked at the woman who I had carried on my shoulders, the woman whose tuition I had paid, the woman whose wedding I had financed. I did not see a child. I saw a stranger. "I didn't trick you, Nia," I said, my voice cold and hard like steel. "I tested you, tested us," she sobbed. "You destroyed us." I walked over to the window. I looked down at the city one last time. "For 40 years I carried this family," I said, keeping my back to them. I carried the stress. I carried the risk. I carried the debt. You grew up thinking money just appeared in the account. You thought the trucks drove themselves. You thought the bank gave loans because they were nice. I turned around. You wanted the company, Nia. You and your husband stood in my kitchen and told me I was obsolete. You told me I was the past. You said you wanted to take control. You said you wanted to be independent. I pointed at the pile of debt on the table. Well, look at it. That is what independence looks like. Independence isn't just spending the profits, it is paying the bills, it is reading the fine print, it is understanding that when you borrow $3 million, you better be the kind of person the bank trusts to pay it back. Brad was shaking his head, mumbling to himself. "I signed the personal guarantee," he whispered. "I signed it. They are going to take my house. They are going to take my car." "Yes, they are," Saul confirmed cheerfully. "And probably your investment accounts too. Though I doubt that crypto wallet has much in it these days." Nia grabbed my arm again. She dug her fingernails into my suit jacket. "Dad, stop it. Fix it. Call the bank. Tell them you are back. Tell them it was a mistake. We will tear up the papers. Please, we will lose our home." I looked down at her hand. I gently peeled her fingers off my sleeve. "I cannot fix it, Nia," I said. "I resigned. It is official. And besides, I have a gardening project to start." I stepped into the hallway. "But Dad," Nia wailed, "you can't leave us like this. We are family." I stopped. I looked back at them. Brad was on the floor, defeated. Nia was hysterical. "Family," I repeated. I remembered the funeral. I remembered the green stickers on my furniture. I remembered the nursing home brochure. Family treats you with respect, Nia. Family doesn't try to declare you insane so they can sell your house. Family doesn't try to erase your legacy because they are too lazy to build their own. I pressed the elevator button. You wanted to be treated like adults. You wanted to be business moguls. The elevator doors opened. "Welcome to the big leagues." I stepped inside. Saul followed me. As the doors started to close, I heard Brad throw up. The sound echoed off the marble walls. Nia was screaming my name. "Dad, Daddy, come back." I didn't look at her. I looked straight ahead. The doors clicked shut. The screaming stopped. The silence in the elevator was profound. Saul looked at me. He didn't smile this time. He just nodded. "That was the hardest thing I have ever seen you do," Saul said quietly. I took a deep breath. I felt a tear roll down my cheek. I wiped it away quickly. It was Saul. It was. But was it worth it? Saul asked. I thought about the key man clause. I thought about the $3.5 million. I thought about the lesson they would learn in the next few months. A lesson about hubris, about gratitude, and about the weight of responsibility. "They will hate me for the rest of their lives," I said. Saul shrugged. "Maybe." Or maybe when they are sleeping on a futon in a rented apartment working a real job for the first time in their lives, they will finally understand what it took for you to give them everything they threw away. I adjusted my tie in the reflection of the elevator door. I gave them the truth, Saul. And the truth is expensive. The elevator hit the lobby. "Let us go," I said. "I have to rehire a security guard, and I have to buy a padlock for a gate." We walked out into the heat of the afternoon. The sun was shining. The world was moving. I had lost a daughter today. I knew that. But I had saved my dignity, and I had saved the jobs of 50 men and women who actually respected me. Sometimes you have to amputate a limb to save the body. It hurts. God, it hurts. But at least now I could live. I went home and changed into my gardening clothes. I put on my wide-brimmed straw hat and my old canvas gloves. I walked out to the backyard where Ruth and I had planted hydrangeas 30 years ago. The sun was hot on my back, a comforting steady heat. I knelt down in the dirt, grabbed a trowel, and started weeding. For the first time in weeks, my mind was quiet. I was just a man with a garden. But 5 miles away, Brad was living in a nightmare of his own design. I didn't need to be there to see it. I heard about it. My phone was buzzing in my pocket every 10 minutes. It was Sam, the guard I had rehired. It was Miller, the dispatcher. It was Big Mike, my senior driver. They were giving me a play-by-play of the collapse of the Roman Empire, and they were enjoying every second of it. The clock started ticking the moment Brad left that law office. He had 48 hours to move 50 massive 18-wheelers. That is not like moving a sofa. You cannot just rent a U-Haul. These are 70-foot-long machines weighing 80,000 pounds. You need permits. You need drivers. And most importantly, you need a place to put them. Brad spent the first 6 hours on the phone. He called every logistics yard in Atlanta. He called the big guys. He called the mom and pop lots. He even called the rail yards. But word travels fast in the trucking industry. Dispatchers talk. Drivers talk over the CB radio. Everyone knew that Bishop Haulage had been hostilely taken over by a man who didn't know a piston from a dipstick. And everyone knew that the Isaiah Bishop Land Trust had evicted him. So when Brad called, the prices suddenly tripled. One lot in Decatur told him they had space for 10 trucks, but they wanted $500 per truck per night paid in advance, cash only. Another lot in Marietta laughed at him and hung up. By 4 p.m. on Tuesday, Brad was sweating through his suit. He had managed to find parking for exactly 0 trucks. Then came the mutiny. At 5 p.m., the shift change happened. The drivers who had been out on local runs were returning to the yard. They parked their rigs in their usual spots, shut down the engines, and walked to the dispatch window to turn in their logs. Usually they would grab a coffee joke with Miller and head home. But today Brad was standing there. He was standing on a wooden crate in the middle of the yard, trying to look authoritative. "Listen up," Brad shouted over the noise of the cooling engines. "There are going to be some changes. We are moving operations to a new, temporary facility. I need everyone to get back in their trucks and drive them to a holding lot in Macon." Macon was 2 hours south. The drivers looked at each other. They looked at Big Mike. Mike folded his arms across his massive chest. He was wearing a Bishop Haulage hat that was stained with grease and sweat. He had worked for me for 22 years. Macon. Mike asked, his voice deep and rumbling like an idling diesel engine. "That is a 4-hour round trip. Who is paying for the overtime?" Brad adjusted his tie. He looked nervous. "We will sort out the payroll later. Right now I just need the assets moved. The company is in a transition period. We all need to make sacrifices." Mike laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound. "Sacrifices?" Mike asked. "You mean like the sacrifice you made when you pushed Ike out the door?" "We heard about the meeting, Brad. We heard you bought the company." "That is right," Brad said, puffing out his chest. "I am the owner, and I am telling you to move the trucks." Mike shook his head. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his keys. He held them up so the sunlight glinted off the metal. "I drove for Ike Bishop because he paid me fair and he treated me like a man," Mike said. You are just a suit with a loan you can't pay." Mike dropped the keys on the ground. Clink. "I am off the clock," Mike said. "And until I see a paycheck with my overtime from last week cleared in my account, I am not driving a single inch for you." Clink. Another set of keys hit the asphalt. Then another. Then another. It was a symphony of defiance. Within 2 minutes, there was a pile of 50 sets of keys on the ground at Brad's feet. "You can't do this!" Brad screamed, his voice cracking. "This is insubordination. I will fire you all." "You can't fire us," Mike said, turning his back. "We quit. Good luck moving them yourself." The drivers walked out. They walked past the gate where Sam was standing. Sam saluted them. They got in their personal cars and drove away, leaving Brad alone in a yard full of millions of dollars of equipment that he couldn't move. Wednesday morning was the fire sale. With the bank breathing down his neck and the eviction deadline looming at noon, Brad panicked. He couldn't move the trucks, so he decided to sell them. But you don't get market value when you are selling in a panic. You get shark value. He called a competitor, a guy named Vinny who ran a cut-rate logistics firm on the south side. Vinny was a scavenger. He smelled blood in the water. Vinny came to the yard at 9 a.m. He walked around, kicking tires, shaking his head, looking at the pristine Kenworth trucks that I had maintained meticulously. "They are okay," Vinny said, chewing on a toothpick. "But the market is soft, and I know you have to be out by noon." "How much?" Brad asked. He was shaking. He looked like he hadn't slept. 30 cents on the dollar, Vinny said. "Cash. I will take 20 of them right now." 30 cents, Brad cried. "These are worth 150,000 each. Not today, they aren't." Vinny shrugged. "Today they are just giant paperweights on land you don't own. Take it or leave it." Brad took it. He had to. He needed to pay the immediate demand from the bank just to keep them from seizing his personal accounts. I watched from a distance. Well, not literally. I was pruning my roses. But Miller told me later. He said it was like watching a man chop off his own fingers to save his hand. Brad sold 20 of my best trucks for scrap prices. Vinny's drivers came in and drove them away, but that still left 30 trucks. And it was 11 a.m. At 11:30, the tow trucks arrived. I had called the city. I had told them there was going to be an issue with abandoned commercial vehicles. The city tow contractor was happy to oblige. They lined up outside the gate, their yellow lights flashing, waiting for the clock to strike 12. Brad was running around the yard screaming into his phone, trying to find buyers for the rest, but nobody was buying. At 11:45, Brad got in his Porsche. He drove out of the gate. He didn't look back at the company he had destroyed in 24 hours. He drove straight to my house. I was in the living room drinking a glass of lemonade when I heard the car screech into the driveway. The door flew open. Brad didn't knock. He stumbled in. He looked like a wreckage. His suit was wrinkled, his tie was gone. His shirt was stained with sweat. His eyes were wild and bloodshot. He looked around the room. He saw the green stickers still on some of the furniture, the stickers he had put there. "Isaiah," he shouted. "Isaiah, where are you?" I walked out of the kitchen. I was still wearing my gardening gloves. "I am right here, Brad. No need to shout." He ran toward me. He stopped a few feet away, panting, heaving. "You have to stop it," he gasped. "The tow trucks, they are at the gate. If they impound the fleet, the fines, the storage fees, I will be bankrupt by Friday." I looked at him calmly. "The eviction notice gave you 48 hours, Brad. You had time." I tried. He yelled. "The drivers quit. The lots were full. You blackballed me. You told everyone not to help me. I didn't tell anyone anything I said. I just let them see who you really are." Brad grabbed his hair. He pulled at it. He was unraveling. "Please," he moaned. "The bank took the money from the truck sale. It wasn't enough. They are coming for the house. They are coming for Nia's savings. We will be on the street." I took a sip of my lemonade. "That is unfortunate," I said. "But that is business." Brad stared at me. He saw that I wasn't going to budge. He saw that the confused old man was gone forever. He looked at the floor. He looked at the spot where he had stood 3 days ago demanding I sign the papers. Slowly, painfully, he dropped to his knees. It wasn't a theatrical gesture this time. It was the collapse of a man who had run out of options. He knelt on my hardwood floor, his expensive pants straining at the knees. He put his hands together. "Please, Isaiah," he whispered, tears streaming down his face, mixed with sweat. "Buy it back." I looked down at him. "Buy what back?" I asked. "The company," he sobbed. "Take it back. I will sign it over. Just take the debt. Take the liability. I cannot handle it. I don't know what I am doing. You were right. I am not a CEO. I am just a gambler, and I lost." He looked up at me, his face a mask of total defeat. "Please, Dad, save us." I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 11:55. I put my glass down on the coaster. I took off my gardening gloves, one finger at a time. "I will buy it back," I said. Brad slumped forward, exhaling a sob of relief. Thank God. Thank God. But I added, my voice hardening. The price has changed. Brad looked up. Anything. I don't care about the price. Just take the debt. I am not paying you for the equity, I said. The equity is gone. You sold my best trucks for scrap. The brand is damaged. The drivers are gone. I walked over to the desk in the corner. I pulled out a $1 bill from my wallet. I walked back to him. I held it out. $1, I said. Brad stared at the crumbled bill. $1, he whispered. But the company was worth $10 million last week. Last week it was run by Isaiah Bishop, I said. Today it is a bankrupt shell run by a man who is being evicted. $1. And I assume the debt. Brad hesitated. Take it, Brad, I said, cold and sharp. Or in 4 minutes the tow trucks start hauling your future away, and I will just buy the trucks from the impound lot at auction next week for pennies. Either way, I get my company back. The only difference is whether you go to jail for fraud or just go bankrupt. Brad reached out. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely grasp the bill. He took it. I pulled a document from my back pocket. I had it ready. Saul had drafted it an hour ago. Sign here, I said, handing him a pen. He didn't read it. He didn't call his lawyer. He just signed. He signed the company back to me. He signed his life away for $1. I took the paper. I checked the signature. Now get out of my house, I said. Brad struggled to his feet. He looked at me hoping for some words of comfort, some absolution. There was none. I turned my back on him and walked to the phone. I dialed the gate. Sam, I said, open the gate. Tell the tow trucks to go home. And tell Big Mike and the boys to come back. We have work to do. I heard the door close behind me. Brad was gone. I looked at the dollar bill in Brad's hand as he left. It was the most expensive dollar he would ever earn. I had my company back. It was battered. It was smaller. But it was mine. And the cleaning lady would have to scrub the floor where he had knelt. I didn't want that stain in my living room. The air in my living room was thick enough to choke on. Brad was still kneeling on the floor, his eyes fixed on the single wrinkled dollar bill I had placed on the coffee table. It was a George Washington worn soft at the edges, the kind of bill you use to buy a pack of gum or give to a grandchild for a loose tooth. To Brad, it was the only life raft in the middle of an ocean he was drowning in. I sat back in my armchair, the same chair Brad had tried to tag with a price sticker just days ago. I watched him sweat. I watched the realization of his total defeat sink into his bones. Pick it up, Brad, I said, my voice devoid of any sympathy. It is a fair offer. It is exactly $1 more than the company is worth right now, thanks to your management. Brad reached out with a trembling hand. He snatched the bill as if he were afraid I would snatch it back. I will sign, Brad gasped, scrambling to his feet. He looked around for a pen. Saul Cohen, who had been standing quietly by the window, stepped forward and offered him one. It was a cheap plastic Bic pen, not the gold fountain pen Brad had used to steal my company. One moment, Saul said, placing his hand over the document. Before you sign, Mr. Bradley, you need to understand the addendum to this repurchase agreement. Clause 7, subsection B. Brad looked like he was about to vomit. What addendum? You said you would take the debt. You said you would take the liability. I took a sip of my lemonade. I did. I am assuming the $3.5 million bank loan. I am assuming the lease penalties. I am assuming the operational costs of the fleet you stranded. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. But I am not assuming the tax liability for the assets you liquidated this morning. Brad froze. What? You sold 20 trucks to Vinny for cash, I said. That transaction happened while you were the sole owner and CEO. That generated revenue. And since you sold them for a fraction of their book value but failed to report the loss correctly because you were in a panic, you triggered a significant short-term capital gains event on the corporate books. Plus, there is the matter of the payroll taxes for the drivers you fired. I pointed to the paper. Clause 7 states that Isaiah Bishop assumes the corporate entity, but Brad Bradley remains personally liable for any and all state and federal tax obligations incurred between Monday morning and Wednesday noon. Brad looked at Saul. Is that much? Saul shrugged. The IRS is very particular about payroll taxes, Mr. Bradley. And the state of Georgia takes a dim view of asset stripping. I would estimate your personal tax bill will be somewhere in the neighborhood of $200,000. $200,000, Brad shrieked. I don't have $200,000. The bank took the cash from the truck sale. Then I suggest you get a good accountant, I said, or a good public defender, because tax fraud is a felony, Brad, and the IRS doesn't care if you were having a bad day. Brad looked at the paper. He looked at the door. He looked at Naya, who was standing in the corner, her face pale as a sheet. If I don't sign, Brad whispered. If you don't sign, Saul said cheerfully, then you still owe the taxes, plus the $3.5 million to the bank, plus the $2 million to the land trust, plus the lawsuits from the clients. It was a choice between being shot in the leg or being blown up by a landmine. Brad signed. He pressed the pen so hard into the paper that it tore through to the coffee table. He scribbled his name, signing away his short-lived empire, signing away his dignity, and sealing his financial ruin. Done, Brad said, dropping the pen. It rolled across the floor. It is yours. Take it. It is all yours. He stood up, swaying slightly. He looked at me, expecting, what, a hug, a thank you. You can keep the dollar, I said. Brad shoved the bill into his pocket. He turned to Nia. Come on, Nia, he said, his voice weak. We have to go. We have to call my dad. Maybe he can lend us the money for the tax bill. We can sell the condo. We can move into a smaller place. We will figure this out. He reached for her hand. Nia didn't move. She stood there staring at him. Her eyes weren't filled with love or support. They were filled with calculation. She was looking at him the same way he had looked at my company, as an asset that had suddenly become a massive liability. Nia, Brad asked, his hand hovering in the air. Nia took a step back. You spent the trust fund money, didn't you? She asked. Her voice was ice cold. Brad blinked. What? No. I moved some of it to secure the loan, but we will get it back. Once the market turns, you moved the money I was saving for the kids. Naya's voice rose to a scream. You pledged my children's inheritance to buy a trucking company you didn't even know how to run. It was an investment, Brad shouted back. I did it for us. You did it for your ego, Nia yelled. She pulled out her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen. What are you doing? Brad asked. I am checking the joint account, Nia said. She stared at the screen. Her face went slack. It is zero, she whispered. The balance is zero. The bank froze it, Brad admitted, looking at his shoes. When they called the loan, they exercised the right of offset. They took everything in the joint accounts. Nia looked up. Her eyes were wide with horror. That was $60,000, Brad. That was our emergency fund. That was the mortgage money. I will fix it, Brad pleaded. I just need time. You don't have time, Nia screamed. You have a $200,000 tax bill. You have no job. You have no company. You are broke. She turned to me. Dad, did you know? Did you know he emptied the accounts? I looked at her. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. I warned you, Nia. I told you that when you sign your name next to his, you share his fate. You wanted to be a power couple. Well, you are powerless together. Nia looked from me to Brad. I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was a survivor. A selfish, weak survivor, but a survivor nonetheless. She realized that if she stayed with Brad, she would be dragged down into the abyss of his bankruptcy. She straightened her spine. She wiped the tears from her face. She looked at Brad with a look of absolute disgust. I am not going with you, Brad, she said. Brad froze. What? What do you mean? We are married. Not for long, Nia said. She walked over to the side table and picked up her purse. I am filing for divorce, Brad. I am filing today. I need to separate my remaining assets from yours before the IRS comes for them. Nia, Brad cried, reaching for her. You can't do that. You can't leave me when I am down. You spent my mother's money, Nia hissed, slapping his hand away. You spent my kids' college fund. You lied to me. You are not a businessman, Brad. You are a loser, and I am not going to let you drag me into a jail cell. She turned to me. Dad, can I stay here, just for a few days until I find a lawyer? The room went silent. Brad looked at me, his eyes pleading. Nia looked at me, her eyes expecting. They both wanted me to save them. Brad wanted me to save his money. Nia wanted me to save her lifestyle. I stood up slowly. I walked over to the fireplace. I looked at the picture of Ruth on the mantel. She would have been heartbroken to see this, but she also raised her children to be responsible. No, Nia, I said. Nia's mouth dropped open. What? But he ruined me. I am the victim here. You are not a victim, I said firmly. You were a co-conspirator. You were happy to throw me in a nursing home when you thought it would make you rich. You were happy to let him forge my signature. You only care about the money now because it is gone. I pointed to the door. You made your bed, Nia. You chose him. You married him. You plotted with him. You don't get to run back to Daddy just because the check bounced. But where will I go? She wailed. I have no money. He took it all. You have a degree, I said. You have health. You have the ability to work. I suggest you start looking for a job. I hear Amazon is hiring warehouse staff. It is hard work, but it pays honest money. Nia stared at me as if I had slapped her. She realized for the first time in her life that the safety net was gone. Brad started to laugh. It was a low, crazy sound. That is cold, Isaiah, Brad muttered. That is ice cold. You are kicking your own daughter out. I am teaching my daughter a lesson, I said. A lesson she should have learned 20 years ago. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. The midday sun flooded into the room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Get out, I said. Both of you. Brad walked to the door, his head hanging low. He paused on the threshold. He looked at the dollar bill in his hand. He crumbled it up and threw it on the porch. I hope you rot in this house, old man, he spat. I picked up the dollar bill. I smoothed it out. I won't rot. Brad, I said. I will grow. Nia followed him out. She didn't look at me. She didn't say goodbye. She walked past me like a stranger. She walked to her own car, got in, and locked the doors. She didn't unlock them for Brad. I watched as Brad tried the handle of her car. She shook her head. She started the engine and drove away, leaving her husband standing in my driveway with nothing but the clothes on his back and a tax bill he couldn't pay. Brad watched her go. He looked at me one last time. You won, he whispered. I shook my head. Nobody won today, Brad. We all lost. I just lost less than you. I closed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I walked back into the living room. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after a hurricane. I looked at the signed contract on the table. I owned Bishop Hollage again. It was broken. It was bleeding. It was a mess, but it was mine. I picked up the phone and dialed Big Mike. Mike, I said. It is Ike. I know, boss, Mike said. We heard. Get the boys ready, I said. We have trucks to find. We have customers to call. We have a company to rebuild. Mike laughed. A deep, warm sound. We are ready. Ike, we never left. I hung up the phone. I looked at the dollar bill in my hand. I walked over to the frame on the wall, the one with the first dollar I ever earned in 1982. I took the back off the frame. I placed Brad's dollar right next to it. The first dollar represented hope. This dollar represented wisdom. I went back out to the garden. The weeds were still there. They didn't care about lawsuits or bankruptcies. They just grew. And the only way to deal with them was to pull them out by the roots. I put my gloves back on. I had a lot of work to do. The drive back to the yard was the longest 5 miles of my life. I was not driving a victory lap. I was driving a hearse carrying the corpse of a week that had almost killed me. But as I turned onto Industrial Boulevard, I saw something that made my heart restart its rhythm. The gate was open. Sam was standing there wearing his old uniform, the one that was a little tight around the middle. He was not wearing the tactical vest of the private security goons. He was wearing his Bishop Hollage cap pulled low over his eyes to block the midday sun. When he saw my truck approaching, he did not just wave. He stepped out into the middle of the road, stood tall, and gave me a salute that would have made a general proud. I rolled down the window. The air smelled of diesel and hot asphalt. It was the sweetest perfume I had ever smelled. "Welcome home, Mr. Bishop," Sam said, his voice thick with emotion. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "It is good to be back, Sam. Is the yard clear?" "Clear of the trash." Sam grinned. "The tow trucks are gone, Vinny's guys left, and the boys. Well, they are waiting for you in the break room." I drove in. I parked in my spot. I got out and walked over to the sign that said, "Reserved for Brad." I pulled out my pocket knife. I scraped the duct tape off. It took a few minutes. The adhesive was stubborn, just like Brad had been, but underneath my name was still there. Faded, scratched, but permanent. I walked into the building. It was quiet. Too quiet. I walked past the empty reception desk where the frat party had been the night before. The champagne bottles were gone, but the stain on the carpet remained. I pushed open the double doors to the break room. 50 faces turned to look at me. They were all there. Big Mike, Miller, the mechanics, the young guys who had just started last month. They were sitting on the folding chairs, standing against the walls, sitting on the tables. They looked tired. They looked worried. But when I walked in, they stood up. It was not a synchronized military movement. It was a ripple of respect. One by one, they got to their feet. Caps were taken off. Nobody clapped. This was not a moment for applause. It was a moment for acknowledgement. I walked to the front of the room. I looked at Big Mike. He looked like he had not slept in 2 days. "I heard you walked out, Mike," I said. Mike shrugged, shifting his massive weight. "We could not drive for him, Ike. The trucks do not run on gas. They run on respect," and the tank was empty. I looked around the room. I looked at the men and women who had mortgaged their houses to buy tools, who had missed their children's birthdays to make deliveries, who had built this company with their sweat while I sat in the office and managed the books. Brad thought he could buy this. He thought he could buy you. I took a deep breath. He was right about one thing, though, I said. The room went deadly silent. He said I was the past, I continued. He said I was old. He said I needed to rest. Murmurs of protest started. "No, boss, you are the heart of this place." I held up my hand. "No, listen to me." He was right. I am 70 years old. I just spent a week fighting my own family to save this place. And I realized something. I cannot do this forever. And I should not have to. I saw fear in their eyes. They thought I was going to sell. They thought I was going to find another buyer, maybe someone better than Brad, but still a stranger. I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out a document that Saul had drafted while I was gardening. "I bought the company back this morning," I said, "for $1. A few chuckles rippled through the room. "But I do not want to keep it," I said. The silence returned heavier this time. "I do not want to leave this legacy to my children," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Because I learned the hard way that blood does not make you family. Sweat makes you family. Loyalty makes you family." I looked at Miller. "Miller, how long have you been dispatching for me?" 30 years, Ike Miller said. "And Mike, how many miles have you logged?" 2 million, give or take, Mike replied. "Exactly," I said. "You built this. You own the reputation of this company. So effective immediately, I am transferring 100% of the equity of Bishop Hollage into an employee stock ownership plan." I held up the paper. "I am not selling the company to a stranger. I am giving it to you." For a solid 10 seconds, nobody moved. They did not understand. "What does that mean, boss?" a young mechanic asked from the back. "It means you are the owners," I said. "It means the profits do not go to a guy in a Porsche. They go into your retirement accounts. It means you elect the board. It means you decide who runs the show. It means that no one can ever come in here and sell your trucks out from under you again because you own the keys." Big Mike took a step forward. He looked at the paper in my hand. He looked at my face. "You are giving it to us," Mike whispered. "All of it. I am keeping 1 share. I smiled. "And the title of Chairman Emeritus, which basically means I get to come and drink coffee and yell at you if the trucks are dirty. But yes, it is yours." Mike started to cry. A big, tough man who could change a tire with one hand stood there and wept. "Why, Ike?" he asked. "Because you earned it," I said. "And because it is the only way I can sleep at night knowing my legacy is in hands that actually know how to steer." The room exploded. It was not polite applause this time. It was a roar. Men were hugging each other. Miller was wiping his glasses. It was the sound of dignity being restored. I spent the next 2 hours shaking hands. I signed the paperwork right there on the break room table, surrounded by coffee stains and donut crumbs. It was the most important deal of my life, and it happened in a room that smelled of stale grease. But the work was not done. At 4 p.m., I went back to my office, my real office. I sat in my chair. I called Saul Cohen. "Is the ESOP finalized?" I asked. Saul laughed. "The ink is wet, but yes. You just gave away a $10 million company, Isaiah." "You know that, right? I gave away a headache, Saul," I said. "And I bought myself some peace. But we have one more thing to handle." "The will," Saul said. "Yes, the will. I need a new draft, Saul. The previous one left the land, the house, and the trust fund to Nia." And now Saul asked, Now I said, looking at the picture of Ruth on my desk. The land under the trucking yard. The 5 acres that Brad wanted to sell for $8 million. Yes, I want it placed in a permanent restrictive trust, I said. It can never be sold for commercial development. It must remain an industrial logistics facility to support the ESOP. And the ownership of the trust, Saul asked. Transfer it to the United Negro College Fund, I said. Specifically for scholarships for students from Atlanta attending historically black colleges and universities. The trucking company will pay rent to the college fund, so every mile my boys drive will help a kid get a degree. That is brilliant, Saul said. And noble. It is necessary, I corrected. Education is what Naya lacked. Not the degree on her wall, but the education of character. I want to make sure other kids get a chance to learn what real value is. There was a pause on the line. I knew what Saul was going to ask next. And Nia Saul asked quietly, "She is still your daughter, Isaiah. She is going to be destitute. Brad has debts that will likely force them into bankruptcy. She will have nothing." I leaned back in my chair. I looked out the window at the yard. The trucks were moving again. The drivers were doing their pre-trip inspections. The hive was humming. I thought about Naya driving away from my house. I thought about her silence when Brad mocked me. "She cannot inherit the bulk estate," I said firmly. "I will not fund a lifestyle of entitlement, so we cut her out completely," Saul asked. "No," I said. "That would be cruel." "And I am not cruel. I am just disappointed." I picked up a pen and scribbled a number on a notepad. "Set up a small annuity," I said. "From the remainder of Ruth's personal savings." "How much?" $2,500 a month, I said. Saul whistled. "That is, not a lot." "In Atlanta. That barely covers rent and groceries." "Exactly," I said. "It is a survival stipend. It is enough so she will never be homeless. She will never be hungry. But if she wants a new car, she has to work. If she wants a vacation, she has to work. If she wants to buy a house, she has to work." I paused. "I am giving her the one thing she tried to steal from me, Saul. I am giving her the opportunity to build her own life. She wanted independence. This is what it tastes like. It tastes like budget planning and hard work." "She will hate you for it," Saul said. "She already hates me," I said. "But maybe in 10 years when she earns her first promotion or buys a car with her own money, she will understand." I hung up the phone. I packed my briefcase. I put the picture of Ruth inside. I walked out of the office. I walked through the bullpen. The dispatchers were on the phones booking loads. "Good night, Mr. Bishop," Miller called out. "Good night, Mr. Chairman." I corrected him with a smile. I walked out to the parking lot. My truck was there. It was old. It had dents. But it was paid for. I got in. I started the engine. I drove toward the gate. Sam waved me through. "See you tomorrow, Ike?" Sam asked. "Not tomorrow, Sam," I said. "Tomorrow I have a date with a hydrangea bush, but I will be in on Monday." I drove out onto the street. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the city. I was not a millionaire anymore. I had given it all away, the company to the workers, the land to the students. But as I drove home to my empty house, to the silence that was no longer lonely but peaceful, I realized something. I was the richest man in Atlanta. I had my dignity. I had my legacy. And I had the truth. Brad and Nia had tried to rewrite my story. They tried to turn it into a tragedy about a senile old man. But I had grabbed the pen back. And I had written a masterpiece. I pulled into my driveway. The green stickers were gone. I had peeled the last one off before I left. I walked up the steps. I unlocked the door. "Honey, I am home," I whispered to the empty air. And for the first time since Ruth died, the house felt like it hugged me back. Order was restored. The balance sheet was zeroed out. And I was ready for whatever came next. The cemetery was quiet that morning. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, not with sadness, but with respect. I walked up the small hill to where Ruth lay carrying a bouquet of hydrangeas from our garden. I had pruned them myself with the same hands that had signed away a multi-million-dollar company just days before. I knelt down on the grass. It was damp with dew. I placed the flowers against the cold granite of her headstone. "Well, Ruthie," I whispered, "it is done. The house is safe. The land is safe. And the company belongs to the people who built it." I sat there for a long time watching the clouds drift over the Atlanta skyline. For the first time in months, the knot in my chest was gone. That tight, constricting fear that I was losing control, that I was becoming obsolete, had vanished. I told Ruth everything. I told her about Brad's face when the tow trucks arrived. I told her about Nia's screams in the elevator. It was hard to tell a mother that her children were lost, but I knew Ruth. She was a woman of faith, but she was also a woman of truth. She would have understood that sometimes you have to let your children fall so they can learn how to stand up. I didn't destroy them, Ruth, I said to the stone. I just took away the cushion. Brad is facing the music now. The IRS does not negotiate like I do. And Nia, well, Nia is finally going to learn what $1 is actually worth. I thought about the scene in the break room, the tears in Big Mike's eyes, the way Miller had shaken my hand. I had given away the equity, but I had gained something far more valuable. I had secured a future for 50 families. I had ensured that the name Bishop Haulage would continue to mean integrity, not just profit. And the land was now a promise. Every year, the rent from the trucking yard would send a dozen young kids to college. Kids who looked like me, kids who came from neighborhoods where opportunity was scarce. I had turned Brad's greed into a scholarship fund. I think Ruth would have liked that best of all. I stood up, brushing the grass from my knees. My joints popped a reminder of my 70 years. But I didn't feel old. I felt seasoned. I felt like an oak tree that had weathered a hurricane and was still standing roots deep in the earth. I walked back to my truck. It was parked under an old oak tree, the chrome bumper gleaming in the sun. It wasn't a Porsche. It wasn't a luxury sedan. It was a 20-year-old Ford F-150 with a scratch on the door and a seat that smelled like old coffee. It was perfect. I climbed in and started the engine. It rumbled to life, a familiar, comforting sound. I wasn't going to the office today. The new board of directors, my former mechanics and drivers, had the situation under control. They didn't need me to hover. They needed me to trust them. So I was going fishing. I had a spot out on Lake Lanier where the bass were biting. I had my tackle box in the back and a cooler full of sandwiches. For the first time in 40 years, my calendar was empty. I put the truck in gear and pulled out of the cemetery. I rolled the window down, letting the wind hit my face. I turned on the radio. Al Green was playing. Love and Happiness. I started to hum along. Then my phone rang. It was sitting on the passenger seat. I looked at the screen. The name flashing was Nia. I stared at it. A week ago, I would have answered. A week ago, I would have panicked, wondering what she needed, wondering how I could fix her problems. A week ago, I was a father, desperate for his daughter's validation. But I wasn't that man anymore. I knew why she was calling. She wanted money, or she wanted to complain about her lawyer, or she wanted to blame me for the fact that she was currently looking for an apartment she could afford on a stipend. She was calling to drag me back into the chaos. I reached out my hand toward the phone. My fingers hovered over the decline button. But then I pulled my hand back. I didn't decline the call. And I didn't answer it. I just let it ring. I let it ring as I merged onto the highway. I let it ring as I picked up speed. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. She could leave a message, and maybe in a few days when I was done fishing, I would listen to it. Or maybe I wouldn't. That was the beauty of my new life. It was my choice. I looked in the rearview mirror. The city was fading behind me. The glass towers where lawyers charged $800 an hour to write bad contracts were shrinking. I took a deep breath of fresh air. I was Isaiah Bishop. I was a gardener. I was a fisherman. And I was free. Many believe inheritance is a birthright, but true legacy is built on stewardship, not entitlement. When greed blinds you to the value of the hands that built the foundation, you often find yourself owning nothing but the rubble. I didn't destroy my children. I simply removed the safety net they were trying to cut down, allowing gravity to teach them the lessons I no longer could. In the end, the most dangerous clause in any contract isn't written in fine print. It's the unwritten law of gratitude: respect the builder, or be crushed by the weight of the building. Thank you for listening to my story. It was a hard road, but I believe I arrived at the right destination. What do you think? Was I too harsh on Nia, or did she need that wake-up call to finally grow up? I read every single comment, so please let me know your thoughts below. And if you believe that respect should always come before money, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories to tell, and we are just getting started. Until next time, Take care of your legacy, and never let anyone tell you that you are obsolete.